don't sign anything. If you still want to see the kids? I was standing in the kitchen, my hand lightly shaking as I held the phone, listening to my daughter's voice, the daughter who had disappeared from my life more than 15 years ago. Say those words as if I were a stranger. That sentence didn't just stop me in my tracks. It forced me to face a question I had avoided for half my life, whether what I had been doing for the past 16 years was truly protection or just holding on. Families sometimes don't fall apart because of great evils, but because of small things left unattended for too long. I used to believe that as long as I stayed, as long as I didn't leave like others did, everything would somehow be okay. But if even staying can cause harm, then where is the line? I asked myself that question right there in my old kitchen, where the smell of morning coffee still lingered in the air. And then I understood. This didn't start with today's phone call. It started in a winter long ago, when I had just turned 51. If you're listening to this story from some city out there, leave me a comment and let me know. And if you've ever witnessed or lived through fragile boundaries in a family, tap like so this story can reach more people. I also want to be clear about something from the very beginning, before going any further. The story I'm telling isn't meant to confirm any objective truth, and it certainly isn't meant to judge right or wrong. It's been pieced together and edited from life experiences, looked back on through my own memories and personal feelings. Memory, as you know, isn't always perfect. I'm telling this to reflect, not to judge, and definitely not to encourage anyone to follow any of the choices in this story. That year, I had been retired for a few months. My name is Maggie Holloway, a widow living in a small Midwestern town where winters are long and so quiet you can almost hear the snow settling on the windowsill. My husband died young from a stroke. My children were grown, each living their own lives somewhere else. The two-bedroom house suddenly felt far too large for one person. In those first months of retirement, I tried to fill my days with small routines. Waking early to make coffee, walking around the neighborhood, reading the print newspaper like I had done for 30 years while working. If I had to describe my life back then in one word, it would be calm. Until one December afternoon when Laura appeared at my front door. She didn't knock hard or urgently. When I opened the door, Laura stood there with two children, a boy and a girl bundled in thick scarves. She looked thinner than I remembered, her eyes carrying the kind of exhaustion you see in someone who's traveled a very long way without rest. "Mom," Laura said, her voice quick and low, "I just need you to help me for a little while. Just a few weeks. I need to get myself together." I didn't ask, get together what? And I didn't ask how long a few weeks really meant. I simply opened the door wider, a reflex left over from when she was still a child. The two kids stepped inside, their shoes covered in snow, their hands gripping each other tightly. They didn't cry or speak, just looked around my living room as if trying to memorize a strange place. Laura set a small duffel bag beside the couch and handed me a set of keys. "I'll call," she said. "I promise I'll call." No paperwork, no agreement, no clear promise beyond a few weeks. Just the cold keys in my hand and a vague unease creeping up my spine. But I didn't stop Laura. I didn't ask more questions. I didn't even hold her for as long as a mother probably should. I just stood there watching her turn and walk back into the snow, telling myself she'd be back soon. In those first days, I lived in a state of waiting. I left Laura's bedroom untouched, afraid to disturb anything. I kept my phone close at all times, even when I was in the kitchen or out in the yard. The children stayed, quiet in a way that was almost unsettling. The older boy, Ethan, I remembered, tried hard to act strong. The younger one, Lily, startled awake from her sleep. I comforted them, cooked simple meals, told old stories I'd forgotten I even knew. A few weeks passed quickly. Then Christmas came. Laura called once, said things were not ready yet, and asked me to give her more time. I said okay, my voice sounding strangely calm to my own ears. I hung 2 extra stockings by the fireplace and wrote the kids' names on them in red marker as if they had always belonged there. Winter dragged on. Snow melted, then fell again. The kids started school near my house. My name appeared on school forms, first as grandmother, then simply as guardian. I signed without thinking much, knowing someone had to. Laura called less and less. Every call came with a different explanation, but always the same ending. I'm not ready yet. I began adjusting my life without noticing. I stopped taking long morning walks because I had to make breakfast. I no longer finished the newspaper because I was interrupted by small questions. I stopped long phone calls with old friends because evenings were for homework. It all happened so naturally, like slipping back into a role I once knew well. Some nights when the house was quiet, I sat alone in the living room and wondered if I was doing the right thing. I wasn't angry at Laura. I didn't see myself as a martyr. I just felt a low, steady worry, like standing on a bridge without seeing either end. But then morning came. Ethan and Lily woke up, and those questions were pushed aside. Late one evening, while searching for spare batteries in Laura's old drawer, my hand touched something cold and solid. It was Laura's old phone, the kind no one uses anymore. The screen was dark, but when I pressed the button, a notification appeared. A draft message. Never sent. I stood there a long time, the phone in my hand, and for the first time in years, I felt that maybe I had missed something more important than simply staying. I put Laura's old phone back in the drawer, closing it very gently, as if even the smallest sound might shatter something fragile inside me. That night, I barely slept. Not because of the unsent message, but because I realized I had stopped waiting for a specific timeline. A few weeks had become a blurry idea, drifting somewhere between rushed breakfasts and exhausted evenings. My retirement income wasn't much. After paying the mortgage, utilities, and insurance, there was just enough left for one person living carefully. With 2 kids, I had to recalculate everything. I learned to shop seasonally, switch familiar brands for cheaper ones, cut back on small social outings I once enjoyed. I didn't feel like I was sacrificing. I was just managing, like any adult does when life quietly places another responsibility in their hands. My mornings started earlier. I woke Ethan and Lily, helped them into coats and scarves, and walked them to the bus stop in the biting cold. Some days, I watched the bus disappear down the snowy road and wondered where Laura was at that moment. But that question usually faded quickly, replaced by the mental list of things to do. Buy cold medicine for Lily, apply for reduced school fees, call the clinic. At school, I grew used to the curious looks. At my first parent meeting, I sat slightly off to the side as if I were only temporary. The teacher smiled kindly and called my name, but the line where the kid's mother's name should have been remained blank. I didn't correct it. I didn't explain. I just answered questions about grades, health, and the things that were immediate and concrete. At the clinic, the nurse called my name when it was our turn. "Relationship to the patient?" she asked, still typing. "Grandmother," I answered. After a while, the question disappeared. My name was automatically listed as the primary contact. I signed consent forms without my hands shaking like they had the first time. Everything changed gradually, without a single moment big enough to mark the shift. Midway through that school year, during a short after-hours meeting, Ethan's teacher looked at me, tilted her head slightly, and asked casually, "Where's their mother?" The question wasn't sharp or intrusive. It came out of habit. I was quiet for a few seconds, feeling my heartbeat slow. Then I said, evenly, "I'm here." The room paused for a brief moment, long enough for me to realize that the answer was both true and not entirely. Driving home that day, I thought a lot. I had never intended to take Laura's place. I never thought of myself as the kid's mother in the biological sense. But I couldn't deny that I had begun filling the space she left behind. And with that came a new worry. Was my presence quietly becoming an irreversible replacement? Children, I realized, don't ask who gave birth to them. They ask who stays when they need someone. I believed that. Believed presence mattered more than titles. But I also began to wonder, if Laura came back one day, what would my place in Ethan and Lily's lives be? And more importantly, was I doing something that made that return harder? Laura sent money sometimes, not regularly, not much, never with an address or explanation. Sometimes it was enough to cover groceries for a week, sometimes just a few $dozen, like a reminder that she still remembered. I didn't ask questions. I didn't save envelopes or receipts as proof. I treated it as something private between Laura and me, not something to measure or balance. Some people suggested I contact family services to make things official. I listened, but chose silence. Not because I feared complications, but because I wasn't ready to name what was happening. Once you name something, you have to face its consequences. And at that time, I just wanted everything to keep moving, even if I didn't know where it was going. Time passed quietly. A few weeks turned into a few years without me noticing where the boundary had been crossed. I stayed in the same house, made coffee every morning, stood at the bus stop in winter cold. But deep inside, I began to understand that I had crossed an invisible line, not with one big decision, but with hundreds of small ones, each reasonable in its moment. That's when I realized some boundaries aren't marked by signs or paperwork. They only appear once you've gone too far to turn back. I didn't tell anyone I was tired, not because I wasn't, but because I didn't know how to say it properly. In a small town like this, people know each other through quick greetings on porches, polite questions at the post office or grocery store. "How are you, Maggie?" I always nodded, smiled, said things were fine, and in some ways, that wasn't entirely a lie. I still woke up each morning, cooked dinner, took the kids to school, but some afternoons, when I closed the door behind me, I felt the weight settle clearly on my shoulders. I hid that exhaustion out of habit. I didn't complain to neighbors or call old friends to vent. I was afraid that if I said it out loud, it would become something too big to ignore, and I wasn't ready for that. I just wanted to keep everything manageable, even though deep down I knew I was unsteady. At home, life slowed into a new rhythm. Ethan and Lily grew used to it. They knew where to leave their shoes, when to turn off the TV, which evenings I liked to read in my armchair. One night, while I was washing dishes, Lily ran into the kitchen, wrapped her arms around my legs from behind, and whispered, "Mom." I turned quickly, my heart pounding. I corrected her right away, almost by reflex. "Call me Grandma, sweetheart." Lily looked up, a little confused, then nodded and ran off like nothing had happened. But later, I stopped correcting them. Sometimes Ethan called me Mom when he needed help with homework. Sometimes Lily said it in the middle of the night after a nightmare. I heard it. I knew it. And I stayed silent. I told myself it was just a habit, that it didn't mean anything deeper. But each time, a feeling rose in me that was hard to name, warm and heavy at the same time. One evening, sitting alone in the living room after the kids were asleep, I blamed myself for not correcting it again. I wondered if my silence was a kind of quiet consent. I loved them, that I couldn't deny. But I was also afraid. Afraid I was going too far. Afraid that one day Laura would return and find something had changed beyond repair. And in that fear, there was guilt. Guilt because I knew I wasn't entirely innocent in this closeness. Laura still called, but rarely. The calls were short, her voice tired, as if she were speaking while doing something else. She asked about the kids' health, a few general questions about school. I answered just enough. When I waited for words like, "I'm coming back soon," or "I'm trying to arrange things," she always changed the subject or ended the call with a rushed excuse. I didn't push. I didn't ask about money or dates. I didn't want to be pressure, and I didn't want to hear promises she might not even believe herself. Sometimes, after hanging up, I stared at the phone for a long time, wondering if my silence was another form of avoidance. Then I reminded myself that everyone moves at their own pace, and some questions asked too early only make things messier. I started writing in an old notebook with a worn cover, bought from a discount store. I didn't write every day. Sometimes weeks passed without a word, sometimes just a few lines before bed. I didn't write to accuse anyone or catalog Laura's absences. I wrote to understand myself, to name feelings I didn't have time to face during the day. In those pages, I admitted to myself that I loved Ethan and Lily deeply, but with fear woven through that love. I wrote about small moments that made me feel more like a mother than a grandmother, and I wrote about the quiet worry that, if I wasn't careful, that love could turn into a kind of replacement I never consciously chose. Some nights, when the wind rattled the windows and the house made the familiar sounds of age, I sat on my bed with the notebook on my lap and wondered whether I was doing the right thing, or just the easiest thing. I didn't have a clear answer. I only knew that the next morning I would wake up early, make breakfast, and see the kids out the door. And in that routine, I slowly realized there were things I didn't tell anyone, not because they weren't important, but because I wasn't brave enough to face them yet. Everything shifted on a morning that seemed ordinary. I was folding laundry when the phone rang. It was the school. The secretary's voice was a little rushed, trying to stay calm but clearly worried. Ethan had slipped during recess and scraped his knee. It wasn't serious, but he needed to be checked in the nurse's office. I dropped the clothes, grabbed my coat, and drove over, repeating one simple thought. It's just a small thing. At school, Ethan sat on the exam table, paler than usual, but smiling when he saw me. Lily stood beside him, holding his hand tightly. I bent down, checked the scrape, feeling both relieved and tense. The nurse handed me a stack of forms and said she needed my signature to authorize an X-ray, just in case. I took the pen, skimmed the familiar lines, then stopped at a blank space at the bottom. "Who are you on the record?" the nurse asked gently, clearly. The question froze me. I looked at the paper, then at her waiting face. In that brief moment, all the years collapsed into a single point. Grandmother. Temporary caregiver, or simply the one who was there. I opened my mouth, ready to answer like always, but the words caught. I thought of Laura, not being there. I thought of Ethan, wincing in pain. "I'm the responsible one," I said, my voice low and slow, as if weighing each word. The nurse nodded and didn't ask anything else. She turned away to process the paperwork, leaving me with the pen and a strange sensation spreading through my body. I signed my name on the final line, my hand slightly shaking, the ink uneven. It was the first time I'd said those words out loud, and I knew, even if no one else heard, it had changed something. We went home that afternoon after the doctor confirmed it was only a minor injury. Ethan's knee was carefully bandaged. Lily was given a small candy to calm her. On the drive back, I drove slower than usual, my hands gripping the steering wheel. I didn't turn on the radio. The silence in the car was so thick I could hear my own breathing. At home, I helped Ethan into bed and made Lily a warm glass of milk. When everything settled, I went into the bathroom, locked the door, and leaned against the sink. My hands were trembling. Not violently, but enough for me to realize I wasn't as composed as I'd been at school. I looked at myself in the mirror, more gray in my hair than I remembered, tired eyes still trying to look steady. I wondered when I had become ready to say, "I'm responsible," in my daughter's place, and whether it was a step I'd never be able to undo. That evening, after the kids were asleep, I sat alone in the living room with only the soft yellow light of a table lamp. I opened the drawer where I kept Laura's old papers, originally looking for health insurance information. My hand brushed against a thin stack I hadn't touched in years. Among old bills and junk mail was a set of printed pages, the corners yellowed. It was an email, not one I'd received, but a printed draft with an unfinished subject line. I recognized Laura's writing immediately, short, broken sentences, as if she'd been thinking while typing. The message stopped midway, no greeting, no signature. She wrote about feeling overwhelmed, about being afraid she wasn't good enough to come back, about believing the kids would be better off staying with me. Then it ended abruptly, as if she'd deleted the urge to hit send. I held the pages for a long time without reading them all, just staring at the opening lines. In the quiet room, a chill ran down my spine. I didn't know when Laura had written that email or why she'd printed it and left it behind. I only knew that maybe all these years I'd been seeing everything from too narrow an angle. I folded the paper, set it on the table, and sat there in silence. Outside, the wind moved through the bare branches, making that familiar winter sound. I realized that what I said that morning at school wasn't just a temporary answer. It was a sign that I had reached a crossroads I'd never prepared for. And in my hands right now was an old piece of Laura, never sent, but enough to make me understand this story was far more complicated than simply who stayed and who left. I read that email slowly, one line at a time, as if the words might disappear if I went too fast. Laura didn't write anything specific about dates or plans. There was no, "I'll be back in the spring," and there was no, "I need 6 more months." Just short, scattered sentences about exhaustion. She wrote that every morning she woke up feeling out of breath, that the thought of coming back made her hands shake so badly she couldn't even type, that she was afraid of my eyes, afraid of the neighbors' questions, afraid of having to explain why she hadn't been able to do what everyone thought was obvious. The email stopped there, with no closing, like a breath cut off mid-inhale. I folded the paper and opened it again, trying to find some sign of calculation or selfishness, but there wasn't any. Only an exhaustion spreading through everything, the kind of exhaustion that doesn't need a clear reason. And in that moment, I realized what I hadn't dared to think for years. Laura hadn't disappeared from our lives. She was hiding from herself, hiding from expectations that maybe even I had accidentally put on her shoulders. Realizing that didn't make me feel lighter right away. It made everything more complicated. Because if Laura wasn't someone who left cleanly and for good, then I had stayed with those 2 children in a murky gap, one where no one was completely right and no one was completely wrong. I sat with that email in my hands for a long time, watching the lamplight fall across the old wooden table. And I wondered how much of my daughter I had truly understood through all the years of being her mother. Some people leave not out of malice, but because they can't stand themselves. That thought came to me gently, not dramatic, but enough to make me stop. I wondered whether forgiveness needs an apology, or if sometimes forgiveness is simply accepting that the other person didn't have enough strength to stay, even if they wanted to. I also understood that my memory, like any memory, may have been worn down and rearranged by personal feeling. The story I was telling myself wasn't the full truth for everyone involved. I couldn't, and didn't want to, assign motives to Laura. I only knew how it felt to me, how I looked back at scattered pieces through the lens of someone who has lived long enough to know that things are rarely just one-sided. After that night, I didn't change my life suddenly. I still woke up early, still made breakfast, still took Ethan and Lily to school, but a new question began forming in my mind. Where is my boundary? Not the boundary between me and Laura, but the boundary between caring and replacing. I loved those 2 children, and I had no intention of leaving them, but I also didn't want to erase their mother's place by accident, even if that place was empty and fragile. I started thinking about more practical things I had deliberately avoided before, not by looking for a lawyer or filing paperwork, but by trying to understand what I could do to protect the kids while not slamming Laura's door shut. Those thoughts made me tired, but it was a different kind of tired, like sore muscles after you've pushed them too long. Instead of turning to legal processes, I went to a counselor in the next town over. She was a few years older than me, her voice low and unhurried, not quick to offer advice. I told her, not everything, but enough for her to understand the situation. I told her about the unsent email, about the guilt of being called mom, about the fear that one day everything would collapse because I'd been standing in the wrong place. She listened, nodded, and asked me just one question. What do you want to protect most? That question stayed with me the entire drive home. I realized I didn't only want to protect the kids from instability. I also wanted to protect myself from becoming someone I never intended to become. And somewhere deep down, I also wanted to protect Laura from the feeling that she had lost everything just because she wasn't strong enough at the right moment. I put the email back in the drawer, but I no longer saw it as a heavy secret. It became a reminder that this story wasn't as simple as I once believed. I kept raising the kids, but I started paying closer attention to small signs, to questions I needed to answer more honestly, even when the answers weren't clear yet. Outside the window, winter slowly gave way to longer days. The snow melted, revealing damp ground and the first tiny buds. I knew I was entering a different stage, one where I couldn't rely only on routine and silence, but at least this time, I didn't feel like I was walking in complete darkness. Time never warns you before it decides to speed up. One day, I realized Ethan was nearly half a head taller than me, his voice noticeably deeper whenever he called down from upstairs. Lily no longer trotted along behind me. She started closing her bedroom door and playing music loud enough for me to hear, but not understand. Their teen years arrived quietly, without any single moment marking the change. It came in small shifts that added up into a distance I had to learn to accept. They knew I wasn't their biological mother. I never lied about that. From the beginning, I called Laura their mother, even as that name grew faint in everyday conversations. As he got older, Ethan started asking more, not in accusation, but with the curiosity of a child trying to piece his life together. I answered what I knew, without embellishing, without guessing. Lily listened more than she asked. Sometimes her eyes rested on me for a long time, as if weighing something she wasn't ready to say. One evening after dinner, Ethan stayed in the kitchen while I was washing dishes. He leaned against the counter, quiet for a moment, then said slowly, "You didn't give birth to me, but you never left me." He didn't raise his voice. It wasn't dramatic. It sounded like a conclusion he'd been thinking about for a long time. I stood with my back to him, my hands still in warm water, feeling my chest tighten. I didn't turn around, and I didn't answer. I just kept washing the last plate, dried my hands, and pulled out a pan to make dinner like I did every day. I didn't answer, not because I didn't know what to say, but because I was afraid my voice would shake if I spoke. Some sentences once said, "Stay with you for a long time." I needed time to place it where it belonged in my heart instead of reacting immediately. Ethan didn't repeat it. He went upstairs, leaving me alone in the kitchen with the smell of onions and hot oil gently sizzling on the stove. Laura was completely silent during those years. No calls, no texts, no money sent. That silence was different from earlier gaps. It was thicker, more sealed, like a door closed carefully and fully. I didn't know where she was or how she was living. Sometimes I thought about trying to find out, asking someone to check, but I stopped myself. I had learned that some doors, if you knock too hard, only hurt both sides. I started thinking more about Ethan and Lily's future, not the specific kind, what school, what career, but their emotional future. I wondered what would happen when I no longer had the strength to be here every day. I didn't start legal paperwork or draw up documents. I just prepared myself, and I prepared them in the ways I knew. I taught Ethan how to manage allowance money, not through long lectures, but by letting him make small mistakes. I taught Lily how to cook a few simple meals, not because she would have to fend for herself soon, but because I wanted her to know she could. I talked to them about leaving home, about the mix of excitement and fear when you step into the world. I didn't say I would always be here. I only said that wherever they went, they would always have the right to come back, even if one day I wasn't in this house anymore. On quiet evenings, when the kids were in their own corners with their own worlds, I sat in the living room reading or knitting. I thought of Laura, not with anger anymore, not with blame, but with a sadness that had softened. I wondered whether she knew how much her children had grown, what they had said, who they were becoming. But I didn't write a letter or leave a message. I didn't want to disturb a silence that Laura might need just to keep going. Sometimes, rarely, I felt like I was standing between two shores. On one side was the responsibility I'd carried for years. On the other was the truth that I couldn't keep everything intact forever. I reminded myself that everything would have to change, whether I was ready or not. Change isn't always loss. Sometimes it's simply a different shape of continuing. Late one night, I turned off the kitchen light and stood there, looking at the house in the dark. I could see the marks of time, scuffs on the walls, a chair with a loose screw, an entry rug worn thin. I could also see what couldn't be seen, attachment, words that were never answered, roles that shifted without anyone declaring them. I knew I couldn't control the future, and I couldn't fix the past. The only thing I could do was be here one more day, with a clearer awareness of my own boundaries. And with that awareness, I began to accept that what I'd called stability all those years was really just a pause before everything moved into another stage. I didn't know what that stage would look like. I only knew that when it came, I wouldn't be as shocked as before. The call came late in the afternoon while I was folding a blanket on the sofa. The last sunlight angled through the window, making dust float visibly in the air. The number on the screen wasn't saved, an unfamiliar string of digits that made me hesitate for a couple of beats before picking up. I had gotten so used to expecting nothing from this phone that the ringing sounded like it belonged to someone else's life. "Hello?" I said, my voice so normal it surprised even me. On the other end, there was a brief silence. Then Laura's voice came through. Not loud, not shaky, not like the Laura from 16 years ago. It was lower, slower, as if it had passed through many layers of exhaustion. "Mom, it's me." 2 words, but enough to make me grip the edge of the table. She didn't apologize. She didn't say she had been wrong. She didn't complain or blame anyone. She only said she wanted to talk. That word choice threw me. Talk about what, after all those years of silence? I didn't ask right away. I let Laura continue, let the rhythm of the call find its footing. "I think it's time. I should talk to you," Laura said, like she was reading a sentence she'd rehearsed many times. I could hear a familiar hesitation in her voice, the same hesitation I used to hear when she was about to say something hard. Then, without warning, Laura said something that tightened my chest. "You've done more than your part, Mom." It wasn't sharp. It wasn't accusatory. It was simply a statement laid down gently, but it felt heavy as stone. I didn't react right away. I looked out the window at the grass turning pale yellow and felt my deepest fear being touched. For years, I had asked myself whether I was doing too much, whether my steady presence had accidentally pushed Laura farther away. Hearing her say it herself, even as just one sentence, knocked me off balance for a moment. But at the same time, I realized her voice didn't carry resentment. It sounded like someone trying to set a boundary without being sure where that boundary truly was. Laura kept talking, a little faster now, as if afraid I would cut her off. She said she wasn't calling to take the kids, not calling for money, not calling to change what existed. "I just want to connect," she said. The word connect sounded strange, almost like it didn't belong to us. I wondered if she even knew what she was asking for, or if she was reaching for a safe word to cover something unsteady. I listened, but my thoughts tangled. I had gotten used to having a clear villain to face. Absence, silence, years without explanation. But now, there was no obvious bad person. No one for me to be angry at. No one for me to condemn. Just a daughter who had grown up in ways I hadn't witnessed, standing on the other end of the call, trying to open a door she herself had closed long ago. Laura didn't say much about Ethan and Lily. She asked briefly, like she was afraid to go too deep. I answered just enough. No more, no less, no boasting, no hiding. I realized I was keeping distance, not because I was angry, but because I needed to understand where I stood in this story. There was a long silence between us. I could hear Laura's breathing, steady but heavy. I knew she was waiting for me to say something, maybe reassurance, maybe pushback, but I couldn't answer right away, not because I had nothing to say, but because any answer might send everything down a path I wasn't ready to accept. "You don't have to answer me right now," Laura said, her voice softer. "I just wanted you to know." The words made my throat go dry. I nodded by reflex, then realized she couldn't see it. "I heard you," I said slowly. That was all I could say in that moment, and I knew it was true. Before hanging up, Laura took a deep breath. "If you're okay with it," she said, "we could meet in person." The last two words were barely spoken, as if she was afraid they would disappear if she said them out loud. I didn't answer immediately. I looked around the familiar room where every object belonged to a life Laura no longer fit into. I could feel hesitation pulling me in two directions. "Let me think about it," I said at last. Not a no, not a yes. Laura was quiet for a second, then said she understood. The call ended gently. No sigh, no promises. I set the phone down, my hands still a little shaky. The house was so quiet I could hear the wall clock ticking, steady and emotionless. I knew that from this moment, everything had started moving in a different way. And even though I hadn't answered, Laura's request to meet in person hung in the air like a question with no period. We agreed to meet at a small coffee shop near the highway, a place where people stopped more than they stayed. I arrived 10 minutes early, chose a table by the window, and ordered a hot tea, even though it wasn't cold outside. When Laura walked in, I recognized her immediately, but it still took a beat to match the face in front of me with my old memories. She looked tired. Not so thin it was alarming, not like someone freshly broken by tragedy. Just tired. The tiredness of someone who's been walking too long without ever stopping long enough to rest. She looked around, saw me, and paused. We both stood up almost at the same time, but we didn't hug. Just a small nod, like two people who have known each other a long time, but aren't sure whether to be close or distant. Laura sat down, slid her purse under the chair, and wrapped both hands around the cup of coffee she'd just ordered. I noticed her hands were trembling slightly, as if she was trying to keep herself steady. We started with simple opening lines. The weather, the drive, when this place had changed owners. No one mentioned 16 years right away, and I knew it wasn't avoidance so much as two people unsure how to enter a big story through a small door. Laura was the one who broke the silence. "I never thought you'd stay that long." She said it plainly, without accusation or dramatic surprise. But it felt like someone gently tapped on a door that had been shut tight inside me. I didn't argue. I didn't confirm. I just looked at her and realized there was both acknowledgement and helplessness in that sentence. In that moment, I understood that neither of us had been prepared for this. Laura hadn't been prepared to leave the kids for so long. I hadn't been prepared to be the one who stayed for that long. We had stepped into a wordless agreement, each carrying our own assumptions, and then we let time do what it does. Laura described the years in an even voice, jobs changing constantly, temporary places to live, relationships that came and went, nothing big enough to make me gasp, nothing tragic enough to explain everything, just a chain of days, one after another, not exactly failure, not exactly success either. I listened without interrupting, without trying to force cause and effect into order. When it was my turn, I did the same. I talked about Ethan and Lily, but not too much. I talked about them growing up, about ordinary changes. I didn't mention sleepless nights or the times I blamed myself, not because I wanted to hide it, but because I didn't want this meeting to become a balance sheet of merit and fault. There was a moment when Laura stopped and looked straight at me, her eyes not turning away. Suddenly, I realized she was waiting for something decisive. Maybe forgiveness, maybe a late-coming accusation. But I didn't give her either. I just sat there, feeling my daughter's presence after all those years, and let that feeling find its own place. Staying is a choice, not an instinct. That thought became very clear in me. I had chosen to stay, day after day, not because I couldn't leave, but because on each of those days, staying made the most sense. But if someone comes back late, what rights do they still have? The right to be called mom? The right to step into the lives of children who grew up without them? I didn't have an answer, and I wasn't sure an answer even existed. We didn't make any agreement. We didn't promise anything about the future. There were no tears. Laura didn't apologize, and I didn't demand one. Maybe because we both understood that some apologies, when they come too late, only make everything heavier. We ended the meeting with a light handshake, like two people who had said enough for today. On the way home, I drove slower than usual. The familiar road stretched ahead, but I felt like I was moving through it in a different state. Not relief, not pain, just emptiness, like a room had been cleared out, but nothing had been put back yet. When I opened the door and stepped inside, I paused at the threshold. The house was quiet, smelling of old wood and familiar soap. I realized that meeting hadn't closed anything, but it had opened a new space inside me. A space with no noise, no climax, only the truth that this story had moved into another chapter. And even though I didn't know where that chapter would lead, I knew I wasn't standing in the same place anymore. I didn't tell Ethan and Lily right after the meeting. I needed a few days for my feelings to settle, to make sure that when I opened my mouth, I wasn't speaking from my own confusion. One evening, after dinner, when the dishes were put away and the kitchen had returned to its familiar quiet, I asked them to sit down at the table. Not with a serious tone, and not like I was preparing some big announcement. I just said I wanted to talk, and they nodded, each in their own way. I told them about meeting their mother. No embellishing, no softening, no exaggerating. I said that Laura wanted to reconnect, that she hadn't made any demands, and that everything was still open. I stopped there and let the words find their own way. I didn't tell them what they should do. I didn't suggest any path is right. I only said this was their story, and they had the right to feel it in their own way. Ethan reacted first. He stayed quiet for a long time, staring down at the tabletop, his fingers lightly tapping the wood edge like he was counting time. Then he looked up and asked a blunt question. "What do you want us to do?" That question, even though it was short, held all the hesitation of someone standing at a crossroads. I looked him straight in the eye and answered slowly, making sure I wasn't accidentally steering him. "I don't need to be chosen," I said. "I just need you to be yourselves." The words hung in the quiet kitchen. No raised voice, no martyrdom in them. It was simply the truth it had taken me years to name. Lily was different. She didn't say anything right away. She looked at me, then at her brother, then out the window as if she were searching for something to hold on to. Finally, Lily asked softly, "If we want to see Mom, will you be sad?" The question touched a very tender place in me. I didn't answer immediately, not because I didn't know, but because I needed to be sure my answer wouldn't put more weight on her shoulders. "I might be sad," I said honestly, "but that's my feeling, not your responsibility." I watched Lily exhale in relief, as if she'd just been allowed to admit something she'd been carrying for a long time. In the days that followed, their reactions stayed different. Ethan grew quieter, spending more time in his room, listening to music and thinking. Lily asked more, small questions that went straight to the core, what their mother liked, what she used to be like, why things had turned out this way. I answered as best I could, always stopping at the boundary of guessing. I didn't want to speak for Laura, and I didn't want to paint a picture I wasn't even sure about myself. I learned how to step back, both literally and in the way it mattered. I didn't stand outside their door when they were on the phone. I didn't ask after every conversation what they'd said. I let silence have its place. That wasn't easy. Sometimes instinct pulled me forward, wanting to protect, wanting to control. But I reminded myself that love isn't always about being the closest one. No one won in those conversations. No one lost either. There was no neat closure, no shared decision made in a single evening. Just overlapping thoughts, feelings not yet named. And I slowly understood that uncertainty isn't the enemy. Sometimes it's the space each person needs to find their own rhythm. One night, after everyone was asleep, I sat alone in the living room and looked around at the familiar things. I could see traces of different seasons layered on top of each other. The years when it was only me, the years with children's laughter added in, and now this stage where everything was beginning to shift. I didn't know how it would end. I didn't know whether today's choices would pull us closer together or push us farther apart. But I knew one thing. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't trying to write a script for anyone. I wasn't trying to make this story right by some standard. I was just standing here, ready to receive whatever came, whatever shape it took. And in that acceptance, I felt a strange kind of relief, like I'd just set down a burden I'd always believed I could never put down. I knew we were getting close to a point where things would have to change more clearly. Not right now, but soon. And when that time came, I wanted to have enough calm to neither cling nor push away, just to be there, at the right time, in the right role. The decision didn't arrive in a single day, and it wasn't spoken in one sentence. It formed slowly, through long evenings, through the times Ethan stayed quiet longer than usual, through Lily's eyes whenever she looked at her brother. I didn't ask either of them first. I waited until they spoke on their own, because I had promised myself I wouldn't place more pressure on either one. Ethan was the one who spoke. One afternoon, he stood at the edge of the living room doorway, his hands in his jacket pockets, like he was about to step outside even though it wasn't dark yet. "Grandma," he said, his voice low and steady, "I want to try living with Mom for a while." I looked at him for a long time. There was no impulse in his words, no challenge, just a desire to try, to know, to experience for himself the part of life he'd been missing. Lily didn't say anything right then. She sat in her chair, gripping the hem of her shirt, her eyes fixed on the floor. I turned to her, not asking, "Are you going?" but asking, "How do you feel?" Lily looked up, her eyes wet but her voice very clear. "I want to stay." No explanation, just stay. In that moment, I felt something inside me split in two. One half wanted to keep Ethan here, wanted to say he didn't have to go anywhere to understand where he belonged. The other half understood that if I stopped him, I would only repeat another cycle. It hurt in a very quiet way, but I didn't stop him. I didn't argue, I only nodded. "I'm not holding you," I said to Ethan slowly, letting each word settle. "I'm just opening the door." I saw his shoulders loosen a little, like he'd just been given permission to breathe. Lily turned to look at me, her eyes wavering but not accusing. I placed my hand over hers, felt that familiar warmth, and knew the three of us were stepping into a hard season. Laura didn't promise anything. When I called her to tell her about Ethan's decision, Laura only said she understood. No, everything will be okay. No, don't worry, Mom. Just understood. I didn't know what that meant in real life, but I didn't ask for more. I'd learned that some promises only soothe you for a moment, then leave behind empty spaces that are hard to fill. On the day Ethan left, I helped him pack. Not much. Clothes, a few books, an old pair of headphones. We worked in silence, not because of tension, but because no one wanted to say something too big in a small room. When Laura came to pick him up, we stood on the front porch. Ethan hugged Lily very tightly, longer than I expected. Lily cried, but she didn't cling to her brother's shirt. She stood straight, like she'd decided she wouldn't make things harder. Ethan hugged me last. "I'll call," he said. I nodded and didn't add any warnings or advice. I knew if I started, I wouldn't know where to stop. When the car pulled away, I watched until it disappeared at the end of the road. Then I went inside, closed the door, and for the first time in a long time, the house felt quiet in a different way. The emptiness showed up fast, not because there was less noise, but because a familiar rhythm was missing. A mug no one used anymore, a pair of shoes no longer in the corner by the door. Lily and I adjusted our routine slowly, like two people learning how to live in a space that had changed shape. I learned to accept that this family no longer had its old form, and maybe never would again. Some evenings, after Lily had fallen asleep, I sat alone in the living room and listened to the wind outside the window. I didn't blame myself, and I didn't comfort myself either. I just let the emptiness exist, without trying to fill it. I understood that emptiness was the price of not clinging, and I accepted paying it. One morning, a few weeks later, I opened the mailbox out front like I always did. Between bills and junk mail, there was a cream-colored envelope, handwriting that felt familiar, but I had to look twice to recognize. My name was written neatly and slowly, as if the writer had weighed every stroke. I stood on the porch for a long time with the envelope in my hand, not opening it right away. I knew that whatever was inside, it would force me to take one more step into this story. And this time, I wasn't sure whether I was ready. I opened the letter in the afternoon, while Lily was still at school, and the house was so quiet I could hear the paper softly rustling in my hands. The envelope wasn't sealed with glue, just carefully folded shut. Inside were a few handwritten pages in Laura's writing, no longer as rushed as I remembered, but still with the familiar rhythm of someone who often pauses mid-sentence to think. There was no apology at the start. No, "Mom, I was wrong," and no words trying to smooth things over. Laura began by admitting her own weakness. She wrote that there had been days she woke up without the strength to even name herself, days when every choice felt heavy as stone. She wrote about the fear of coming back and discovering that everyone was better off without her, a fear that makes someone want to return and disappear at the same time. She didn't blame me, and she didn't blame circumstances. She only wrote that, at certain times, she hadn't been strong enough to do what needed to be done. I read slowly, not because the handwriting was hard, but because I wanted each sentence to have time to settle. In some parts, Laura admitted she had leaned on me, staying like a life preserver, without having the courage to ask how long that life preserver could hold. In other parts, she wrote that when she heard me say, "I'm just opening the door," she understood that some doors can't be pulled toward yourself forever. She wrote that she didn't know where the future would go, but she knew she no longer wanted to hide in silence. There were no promises in the letter, no concrete plan, no clear proposal to rebuild anything, only an admission that she had been weak, afraid, and had chosen to retreat instead of face things. And maybe, for Laura, being able to write that down was already a long distance from 16 years ago. I folded the letter, set it on the table, and sat still. In that moment, I realized I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel the relief I'd imagined either, just a different kind of quiet, deeper, with fewer sharp edges. I knew some people need an apology to move forward. I also knew that for some, when an apology comes too late, it can't do what everyone hopes it will. For me, this letter didn't close anything. It only placed another piece of truth on the table. I didn't write back, not because I had nothing to say, but because I didn't want to turn Laura's admission into an exchange. I was afraid that if I wrote, I'd accidentally place another burden on her, a burden to respond, to promise, to repair. I chose silence not to punish her, but to give what had just been said room to breathe. I also reminded myself that my memory, what I remember, what I feel, may have been rearranged by the years. The story I tell myself is how I look back, not a sentence handed down to anyone. I wasn't certain enough to judge Laura's motives, and I didn't want to trap the past inside neat conclusions. I only knew how I had lived, and the choices I had made within what I was able to do. I put the letter in the drawer, tucked beneath old papers and my worn journal. I didn't lock it away. I didn't hide it. I just stored it there, like something that exists alongside my present life, not something that has to be mentioned every day. Life went on in small rhythms. Lily and I slowly got used to a house with fewer people in it, quieter dinners, slower mornings. I was getting older. That couldn't be denied. But with age, I felt lighter. Not because there was less to do, but because I tried less to control what was never truly mine to control. I learned to let unanswered questions stay where they were, without forcing them to answer right away. Some evenings I sat reading, yellow lamplight falling across the page, and I thought about Laura not with the urge to fix anything, but with a gentle curiosity. What kind of person she might become when she stopped running. I thought about Ethan, about the road he was trying out, and I thought about Lily, who chose to stay but wasn't required to stand still. I realized that this family, even without its old shape, still existed, imperfect but real. When I closed the drawer, I didn't know how this story would end. Maybe there would be more meetings. Maybe there wouldn't. Maybe one day I'd write back, or maybe that letter would sit there for a very long time. What I knew for sure was that I no longer needed a clear conclusion in order to keep living. And maybe it was that uncertainty that brought me closer to what I'd been searching for years. A peace that doesn't come from everything being resolved, but from accepting things as they are. I returned the key on a quiet morning when the sun hadn't yet warmed the front step. Laura stood in the doorway holding a cup of cold coffee, looking at me like she was waiting for an opening line. I didn't have one. I just placed the key into her palm and slowly closed her fingers around it. No promises, no conditions, no instructions for the future, just returning something that had once been handed over at a time when we both believed it was temporary. Laura didn't ask why. She nodded lightly as if she understood some decisions don't need explaining. We stood there for a few more seconds, then I turned away. I didn't look back, not out of coldness, but because I'd learned that in some moments, if you look 1 second longer, you'll want to hold on to more than you should. After that, time moved in a very different rhythm. Ethan visited often. He grew fast, bringing new stories, new questions that no longer searched for permission. We talked like people who know each other well, not to make up for anything, but to stay current with each other. Lily was different. She called, stopped by sometimes, but not regularly. There were long gaps, and I respected them. I understood that everyone keeps connection in their own way, some through presence, some through just enough distance. I lived alone again, not for the first time, but for the first time with a different feeling. The house no longer had to adjust to school schedules, early dinners, or late-night conversations. I rearranged things, not to erase traces, but to make room for the present. Some mornings, I made coffee for one, sat watching sunlight slide across the wooden floor, and realized I wasn't as empty as I'd once feared. I felt full in a quiet way. Our story wasn't complete. It didn't end with a family reunion meal or a promise kept perfectly, but it was real. Real in the way ordinary life usually is, with gaps, things left unsaid, and decisions without a soundtrack. I learned that family isn't about holding tight, but about knowing when to let go. Letting go isn't because the love is gone, but because you love in a way that doesn't leave someone gasping for air. Love doesn't guarantee happiness. It doesn't promise a gentle ending, but without it, everything is surely hollow. Between those two truths, I chose love with boundaries, a choice that isn't easy but necessary. I also want to say this clearly in the steady voice of someone who has lived long enough to know she can be wrong. The story you've just heard is fictional, pieced together and edited from many slices of real life and human experience, told through my memory and personal interpretation. It isn't meant to confirm objective events. It doesn't represent absolute right and wrong. It doesn't assign motives, and it doesn't encourage anyone to copy what's done here. I'm telling it to reflect, not to judge. If, in real life, you're in a similar situation, pulled between love and boundaries, seek guidance, talk early with the people involved, and set clear boundaries. Slow, kind conversations often save more than rushed decisions. Before I end, I want to thank you for staying with me this far. If you're listening from some city out there, leave me a comment and tell me where you're from. If you've walked through fragile family boundaries, held on, let go, or are learning how to do both, share your experience. Tap like if this story touched you, subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss other everyday stories, slow, thoughtful, and not quick to conclude. Thank you for listening. Somewhere, maybe very close, I think we're all learning the same lesson, knowing when to hold the key and when to give it back. When my husband passed away, I thought I had already reached the bottom of grief, but the real tragedy was only beginning. The night after the funeral, my daughter-in-law threw my luggage into the garage and said coldly, "From now on, you'll be sleeping with the dog." I didn't react. I just nodded and smiled. She had no idea that behind my silence, I was holding a far greater secret: the tens of millions of dollars and the seaside mansion my husband had left behind. That night, in the damp chill of the garage, I swore I would rewrite the rules, with the calm resolve of a widow who had loved deeply and endured enough. If you're still listening, tell me where you're watching from. Every comment you leave is another mark in this journey. And if this story has touched you, don't forget to hit like so it can reach even further. My name is Cassandra Reed, 60 years old. I had just buried my husband of 42 years, Gordon Reed. That morning, a light rain fell over Memorial Oaks Cemetery in Houston. Each drop felt as cold as steel against the damp earth. Black umbrellas formed a ring around the flag-draped coffin, while the soft sound of an organ played somewhere in the distance. The air was thick, filled with the scent of lilies, wet soil, and tears. I stood there, gripping my shawl tightly, trying to balance between sorrow and a strange kind of emptiness. People say that after death, love is all that remains. But that day I realized love isn't the only thing that survives. Ambition and hypocrisy do too. My son Nathan sat quietly in the front row, eyes red and swollen. My daughter-in-law Sable was different. She didn't cry. She didn't tremble like someone mourning a loved one. Instead, she watched her gaze flicking from one guest to another, as if she were sorting and calculating who might be useful later. When I caught that look, I knew immediately. This wasn't grief. This was the beginning of a plan. As the priest praised Gordon's generosity and devotion to his family, I saw Sable's jaw tighten. Beneath her black veil, her eyes were as cold as stone. A chill ran down my spine, not from the weather, but from the realization that I had been waiting for this very moment, waiting for my husband to be lowered into the ground so she could begin dividing what remained. When the ceremony ended, people left one by one, leaving only white flowers trembling in the rain. I leaned over the coffin, laid my hand on it, and whispered, "Rest easy, Gordon. I'll be fine. I promise." I didn't know that only a few hours later, that promise would become a vow to reclaim justice for myself. The black Mercedes rolled slowly through the familiar streets of Houston. I sat in the back seat, watching the tall buildings fade behind a curtain of rain. The whole city looked like it was trapped under a sheet of glass, cold and distant. The seat beside me was empty, the place where Gordon used to sit when he drove me to church or to dinner parties. Now it was just me, the hollow embrace of leather seats, and the meaningless hum of warm air from the vent. In the front seat, Sable drove, her dark red nails tapping rhythmically against the steering wheel. Her eyes flicked to the rearview mirror occasionally, meeting mine without an ounce of sympathy. Nathan sat beside her, gripping his phone tightly, as if any wrong word might make everything fall apart. No one spoke for the entire ride home. When the car turned onto the oak-lined driveway leading to our two-story home in River Oaks, where Gordon and I had lived for over 20 years, my heart clenched. That house once overflowed with laughter, the smell of apple pie and jazz music every Saturday night. Now it felt hollow, a battleground instead of a home. When the car stopped, I opened the door and froze. My 3 brown leather suitcases, the ones I'd packed just to stay at Nathan's house for a few days after the funeral, were already sitting by the garage, in the rain. A thin layer of dust coated them, as if they'd been put out early that morning. I looked up at Sable, standing on the porch with her arms crossed. "What's going on?" I asked, my voice raw after a long day. She shrugged, a faint smirk forming on her lips. "Oh, I thought you already understood. Now that Gordon's gone, things have to change." Her tone was light, but every word landed like a blade. Nathan stood behind her, staring at the floor. "Son," I said softly, "what does your wife mean by that?" He avoided my eyes. "It's just temporary, Mom. We just need to rearrange a few things." Before I could say anything else, Sable stepped forward, pulled open the garage door, and said clearly, "You can stay here. The room next to the dogs is still empty." Then she turned her back on me as if she'd just finished some trivial task and walked inside. Her heels clicked sharply against the wooden floor, a cold sound that echoed through the rain. I stood still for a few seconds, letting the tremor in my hands subside. The rain kept falling, and the drops ran down my face, mixing with tears I couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. I bent down, grabbed my suitcases, and pulled them into the corner of the garage, a small, narrow space where Gordon used to keep his toolbox. The walls were stained and damp, the air smelled of rust and oil, and the tiny window looked out toward the iron fence behind the house. It was not a place for a mother-in-law, let alone the woman who had built this family alongside Gordon, but I didn't cry again. I simply exhaled and sat on the edge of the old folding cot Sable had prepared for me. On the small wooden table beside it sat a half-empty box of dog food. A faint smile crossed my lips, not because I found it funny, but because I realized something important. I had just entered the first stage of a game whose rules only I knew. That night, I couldn't sleep. The rain drummed steadily on the metal roof like a clock ticking away time. I sat in the dark, replaying every detail of my life. Gordon, the calm and disciplined man he was, had always told me, "Cass, I think you're weak. Let them. The right silence is your strongest weapon." I never thought I'd need that advice, but tonight I knew the time had come. Because no one knew that before Gordon passed away, he had quietly arranged everything: the accounts, the investments, even the Azure Cove villa in Cancun. Everything was under my name. The total value, $19 million. I was the only one who knew the codes, the only one who had the keys. And Sable? She thought I was just a frail widow living off her son. I smiled the same smile Gordon once called, the smile of someone who already knows how the story ends. When morning came, I was still sitting by the small window in the garage, watching the first drops of dew fall. I heard Sable moving around upstairs, the clink of dishes, the smell of coffee drifting through the air. She was living in the glow of victory, and I was simply waiting for the first card to turn. I knew exactly what to do: stay quiet, watch, remember, and when the time was right, I'd remind them who truly owned this house. Later that morning, Nathan came into the garage before heading to work. He hesitated at the door, then said softly, "I'm sorry, Mom. Sable's just under stress. Everything will be fine." I looked at my son, the same boy who once cried in my arms when his first dog died at age 8, and realized he'd been swallowed by fear of conflict. "It's all right, Nathan," I said gently. "I know where I belong." The door closed. The sound of the car faded away. I looked around the cold room, my fingers brushing against the locket Gordon had left me. A draft came through the gap under the door, carrying the damp smell of gasoline. I closed my eyes and whispered to myself, "All right, Cassandra. Start from here." That evening, while Sable and Nathan dined in the spacious dining room, I listened to their laughter from below. I wasn't jealous, nor was I angry. I just sat there in the dark, writing my plan step by step in a small notebook. Observe. Record every habit. Find weaknesses. Wait, because in every war, the silent ones are always the most dangerous. And in that house where I'd been pushed down to live beside the dogs, I knew the greatest battle of my life had just begun. I used to think there was no room in that house that could feel unfamiliar to me until I stepped into the one they said I'd stay in for a while. A small, damp room with one narrow window looking out toward the trash bins. The walls were stained, the ceiling water-marked, and the concrete floor felt like ice. In the middle stood a rusty iron bed tilted to one side, its mattress sagging with the weight of someone forgotten. Next to the wall was a low shelf holding a few cans of dog food and a lamp without a shade. I set my suitcases down and cracked the window open. The air carried the smell of wet grass and garbage. Outside, the backyard light flickered yellow through a torn curtain. Upstairs, I heard Sable's voice echo down. "You should be grateful we're letting you stay. This isn't a hotel." Her words fell like drops of acid. I didn't answer. When Gordon was alive, this space had been a tool shed he used to joke and call it the tech room. Now it was my bedroom, where I had to learn to breathe softly so no one would notice. The first morning of my new life began earlier than I expected. At 6 a.m., when the dogs barked, Sable was already at the door, holding a cup of coffee. "You can help me with breakfast," she said lightly, as if giving an order. "I have a meeting at 8. She didn't wait for a response, just glanced around the room once and walked away. I changed into an old dress, wrapped a thin scarf around my neck, and went upstairs. The cold from the tiled floor seeped through my feet. On the kitchen counter lay everything already set out: eggs, bacon, bread, oranges, and a note scribbled in her handwriting. "Eggs Benedict for Nathan. The kids like pancakes. I'll have something light, just salad." The word "I" was underlined, as if she needed to mark her territory. I turned on the stove, my hands trembling not from fear, but from memory. Back then, Gordon always made breakfast. He loved his old-fashioned coffee, and I'd watch him toast bread while telling stories from his military days. Now I was in the same kitchen, but every trace of warmth had been wiped away. When I brought out the food, Nathan came downstairs. His eyes avoided mine. He looked tired. "Morning, Mom," he murmured, giving me a quick kiss on the cheek like it was an obligation. I smiled. "Did you sleep well?" "Kind of." He glanced around and added, "Don't take it personally. Sable's just tense." "I understand," I said softly. The truth was, I understood far more than he thought. He was trapped between duty and fear. Sable knew exactly how to make a man feel guilty just for breathing wrong. When everyone sat down to eat, I stayed by the counter. Sable looked up, her tone calm but cold. "You can clear the dishes when we're done. And don't forget to feed the dogs." "No, please." "No, thank you." Nathan sipped his coffee, avoiding my gaze. Their children, Ava and Liam, glanced my way, uncertain. I smiled gently at them. Ava lowered her head, while Liam scratched his neck, trying to smile back. After they left, the house fell silent. I stood alone in the kitchen, the only sound the ticking of the clock. I washed dishes, wiped counters, and folded towels, each motion like a ritual of endurance. By noon, I was hanging laundry in the backyard. The heat carried the scent of soap mixed with sunlight. I looked toward the magnolia tree Gordon had planted years ago. It was taller than the roof now, its white blossoms glowing under the sunday. I remembered his hand, his deep laugh when he said, "This tree will shade you one day, Cass. When you're old, all you'll need is to sit beneath it." Now I really was old, sitting under that same tree, but no one was sitting beside me anymore. In the afternoon, Ava and Liam came home from school. I made cookies for them, just like I used to. Ava hesitated, looking at the tray. "Grandma, Mom said you don't have to do that anymore. She said you should rest." I smiled. I like doing it. "Go ahead, they're still warm." The girl glanced around, then picked one up and took a small bite. Her face lit up. Liam rushed over, grabbed two, and slipped them into his pocket. "Don't tell your mom," I whispered with a wink. They nodded, then ran upstairs. I watched them go, my heart aching but warm. At least there were still two souls in this house who hadn't been taught that kindness was a weakness. Around 6 p.m., Sable came home. She walked straight into the living room, dropped her purse on the table, opened her phone, and started a video call. Her voice changed from cold to syrupy in seconds. I heard her laugh. God, I'm exhausted, but it helps having a free housemate around. A woman's laughter echoed from the phone. I froze mid-motion, the dish towel slipping from my hand. I wanted to step out and say that the so-called free maid was once the woman who signed the very first check that bought this house, but I didn't. I simply bent down, picked up the towel, folded it neatly, and kept wiping the same spot. She thought I didn't hear her. I let her think that. When night fell, I sat in my small room, lit only by the weak glow of a yellow lamp. The sound of the TV drifted down from the living room laughter, the clinking of silverware against plates, the kids arguing over cartoons. I didn't feel angry, just an emptiness spreading quietly inside me. I opened the small leather notebook Gordon had given me for our 40th wedding anniversary, the cover worn, still faintly scented with old paper. I wrote on the first page, Day 1. No one remembers who I used to be. They think I've lost my worth. But I won't remind them, I'll let them find out on their own. Then I began noting down every small detail. Sable came home at 5:47 p.m., her coat reeking of expensive perfume. Nathan arrived later, 5:52, looking tired and avoiding conflict. Ava and Liam ate dinner at 6:10. Sable chatted on the phone with someone, laughing loudly. At 7:35, she locked the master bedroom door. The lines looked dry and emotionless, but to me, each one was a fragment of a map leading to the truth. Late that night, I sat listening to the rain. Moist air crept through the cracks in the door, cold against my skin. I pulled the thin blanket over me. The streetlight outside cast my shadow onto the wall, an old, small woman sitting alone in the dark. Invisible, unwanted, forgotten. I smiled faintly, just a flicker of light breaking through the night. I was no longer Cassandra Reed, wife of Gordon Reed, lady of the River Oaks house. I was the woman pushed to the lowest floor of the very home I helped build. But from this lowest place, I would watch, learn, and prepare for my return. When the clock neared midnight, I closed the notebook and slipped it under my pillow. The ceiling glowed faintly from passing headlights. I thought of something Gordon once said at our last dinner together. If one day you find yourself at the bottom, Cass, remember the ground there will help you push back up. In the darkness, I whispered. Thank you, Gordon. I still remember how to rise. Outside, the rain had stopped. Crickets chirped, and the wind slipped through the cracks. I closed my eyes, breathing steadily. Tomorrow, I would keep cleaning floors, washing clothes, and brewing coffee at 7 a.m., just as they expected me to. Because only by pretending to be who they thought I was, could I stay long enough to see what I needed to see. And when the time came, I would be the only one who knew how to turn the game around inside this very house. Each morning began the same way, the coffee machine humming upstairs and Sable's heels tapping across the hardwood floor. The clock in the garage read 5:30 a.m. I woke before the alarm out of habit. The room was cold, heavy with the smell of rust and damp air. I slipped on an old cardigan, tied my hair back, and stepped into the hallway. Outside, dawn was still gray. The neighbor's porch light cast a pale glow through my window, stretching a long shadow across the floor. I climbed the stairs and opened the kitchen door. Everything looked perfect, just the way Sable liked it. Polished granite counters, utensils lined in perfect rows, and the tablecloth ironed flat without a single crease. I began my routine, the unpaid maid. Eggs Benedict for Nathan. Pancakes for the kids. Salad with no dressing for Sable. She feared gaining weight but never skipped her morning whipped cream latte. I cooked, arranged, and cleaned according to the schedule she'd written on the note taped to the fridge. Every task had to be done down to the minute. If breakfast was 5 minutes late, Sable would purse her lips and say, "You need to manage your time better." Nathan usually came downstairs around 10 to 7, Ty already nodded, his cologne still fresh. "Morning, Mom," he'd say without looking up from his phone. I'd smile. "Soft-boiled or hard today?" "As usual." "Thanks, Mom," he'd reply, eyes still on the screen. Sable appeared last, always with that deliberate air of being busy. "Press my navy dress, please. I have a presentation at the club today." She didn't even glance at me, just poured her coffee and sat down with her fashion magazine. "And clean my nude heels? There's a stain on the heel?" "No, please." No, thank you. Her voice was light, detached like someone giving orders to a subordinate. Nathan rarely stayed home after fall oration. Breakfast. He'd leave behind the dishes and a quick, "I have to get to the office." The door closed, and his car pulled away. I heard Sable pacing the house, her high heels tapping steadily across the floor. She was on the phone, half whispering, half laughing. I looked into a nursing home in Dallas. "The cost is way cheaper than keeping her here. No, Nathan doesn't need to know." Men are easy to convince, just say financial benefit, and they'll agree. I stood in the hallway leaning against the wall, still holding a damp rag. Each word dripped into my ear like acid, slow and burning. A nursing home. Cheaper. Those two words echoed in my head. I understood then. To Sable, I was no longer her husband's mother. I was an expense she was eager to cut. At noon, I ate a slice of cold bread in my room. The old air conditioner upstairs rattled faintly. I opened my notebook and added a new line. Day 7. Sable researching nursing homes in Dallas. I wasn't angry, just calm, unnervingly calm. Anger clouds, judgment, and I needed clarity more than ever. That afternoon, I went upstairs to iron clothes. In Sable's dressing room, the air reeked of Chanel perfume and new fabric. Her closet doors were wide open, rows of dresses, shoes, and bags arranged by color. I ironed each one carefully, as though touching something that no longer belonged to me. On the vanity table, a credit card statement had blown open. I hadn't meant to look, but the bold print caught my eye. Spa Serenity, $1,200. Another page read, Yoga Retreat Aspen, $3,450. I frowned. Nathan had told me just last week that his company was tightening the budget, and yet Sable had bought a new Hermes bag. I didn't touch a thing. I simply took note. That afternoon, when Ava and Liam came home, I was folding laundry on the sofa. Ava approached, holding her sketchbook. "Grandma, why don't you go back to your own house? Mom doesn't seem happy with you here." I smiled and brushed her hair. "I'm saving money, sweetheart. It's easier to take care of you two this way." Ava tilted her head, her eyes wiser than her years. "But Grandma, you don't need to save. Dad said you have savings." I smiled gently. "Did he?" "Well, sometimes adults save things not to spend but to wait for the right time." She nodded, not fully understanding, but she stayed quiet. Liam ran up, waving a paper. "Look, Grandma, I got an A in history." I hugged him, feeling my heart soften. In this cold house, those two children were the only warmth left. That evening, Nathan came home late. His tie was loose, sweat dampened his collar. "Have you eaten?" I asked. "Not yet, but don't worry. Sable said she's ordering takeout." I just nodded. As he climbed the stairs, I heard Sable's voice drift from the living room. "I told you. The cost of keeping your mom here is higher than I expected. If we move her to a nursing home, we can sell the house in Galveston. Doesn't that make more sense?" Nathan was silent for a long time, then murmured, "Sable, Mom's still healthy. It's not that bad yet." "You're always so soft," she scoffed. "By the time you realize it, the money will already be gone." I stood in the shadows by the staircase, listening to every word. I didn't interrupt. I'd learned that silence, used wisely, is worth more than 1,000 arguments. After dinner, when everyone was asleep, I cleaned the kitchen. The house was so quiet I could hear the clock ticking. I washed each glass, dried it, and placed it neatly on the shelf. The reflection of the cold marble countertop shimmered under the light. I opened the drawer and took out my leather notebook. My pen moved slowly, each word deliberate. Day 8. Spa and yoga bills don't match. Nathan seems unaware. Sable mentioned selling the Galveston house. On the next page, I wrote 3 bold words: start tracking everything. I wasn't great with technology, but Gordon had taught me how to use online banking and manage financial records. His old office still had the desktop computer and the old ledger books. I knew the password. Every night, once the house was asleep, I went upstairs. The pale blue glow of the screen lit my face. I checked the joint bank account. Nathan and Sable shared the one Gordon had helped set up to support their startup. After a few searches, I noticed a suspicious pattern. Regular cash withdrawals each month, sometimes a few $1,000s, sometimes more than $10,000. The recipient was a company called Serene Holdings LLC. I looked it up. No office, no employees. Just a P.O. box address in Dallas. I sat there for a long time. The smell of cold coffee filled the room. Then I turned off the computer, closed the door, and went back down to the garage. Before sleeping, I wrote in my notebook, "Numbers don't add up. Money is disappearing. Need to confirm. Say nothing to Nathan." I set the pen down and glanced around the small room. The streetlight outside cast a beam across the rusty wall. I lay down, listening to the insects outside and the wind brushing against the roof. I knew they wanted me gone from this house. But what they didn't understand was this. When a woman has lost everything, her dignity is the last thing she'll fight for. And I, Cassandra Reed, had begun my battle not with screams, but with a pen and deadly silence. I waited until Sable and Nathan left the house before picking up the phone. The air in the kitchen that morning felt heavy, as if someone had sealed every door and forgotten to leave an exit. On the table, a cup of cold coffee sat untouched. I looked out the window at the magnolia garden bathed in early May sunlight, the white blossoms still blooming, though no one cared to look. I took a deep breath and dialed. The man's voice on the other end made my hands tremble slightly. "Morton Law Office, this is Caleb speaking." "Caleb, it's me, Cassandra Reed." A pause, then his voice softened, warm and careful. "Mrs. Reed, I've been expecting your call. When can you come in? There are a few things you need to see right away." I checked the clock, only 8:40 a.m. Sable had already driven off to her meeting. Nathan was likely at the office. "I'll be there in an hour," I said, and hung up. I changed into a simple cream-colored dress, tied my hair neatly, and picked up my small handbag. Before leaving, I opened the bottom drawer, took out my leather notebook, a pen, and the old key Gordon had once used for his private safe. Holding them felt like holding the last piece of myself. The drive to Morton & Associates wasn't long, but I took it slow. Morning traffic filled Houston. Sunlight flickered through the windshield, glinting on my hands. It felt strange yet familiar once. I'd been the woman sitting in the passenger seat beside Gordon, listening to him talk about markets and investments. Now, I was driving alone in silence. Caleb's office was in an old red brick building in Midtown. A brass nameplate bearing his name gleamed in the sunlight. He greeted me at the door, the same calm presence as always, gray suit, blue tie, and the kind smile of a man who'd worked with Gordon for nearly 20 years. "Cassandra," he said, shaking my hand, "it's good to see you again. And my condolences once more." I nodded lightly. "Thank you, Caleb, but I didn't come here today to grieve." He nodded and motioned for me to step into the conference room. It was bright, with landscape paintings on the walls, a glossy mahogany table, and the faint scent of fresh paper mingled with Earl Grey tea. On the table sat a thick file in a blue cover labeled "Assets and Trust of Gordon Reed." Caleb opened the file, his voice slow and precise, like a man reading a will back to memory. Gordon set up a fideicomiso, a form of asset trust similar to a trust, but it secures ownership for the beneficiary in Mexico. This Highland Park estate home, the Azure Cove Villa in Cancun, all stocks, bonds, and investment accounts are in your name, not co-owned, entirely yours. I sat still. My ears rang. Caleb slid over another stack of papers, with a familiar signature at the top, Gordon's hand, slightly slanted, firm and steady, just like when he used to sign our Christmas cards. I read slowly, line by line. until the handwritten note at the end. Make sure Cass never has to depend on anyone. Never. I set the papers down. My hands trembled. A sob slipped out before I could stop it. Caleb gently handed me a tissue. He prepared these more than a year ago, after a heart-related hospital stay. He told me, "I'm not afraid of dying. I'm afraid Cass might have to ask someone's permission to live in her own home." I couldn't speak. I only felt pain spreading through me, mixed with a strange warmth, as if Gordon were still sitting beside me, holding my hand across time. Caleb continued, voice even, "The current estimated total is $19 million. That includes the Highland Park property, the Azure Cove Villa, a portfolio of energy stocks, government bonds, and retirement investment accounts, all sealed under your name." I swallowed. "And Nathan?" "He has a portion, but at a support level. Gordon used to say, if Nathan has a good head on his shoulders, he'll build his own wealth. If not, giving him too much will only spoil him." I laughed through tears. That was exactly Gordon, practical, blunt, yet full of love. Caleb folded his hands, sitting across from me. "Cassandra, I know you're under pressure. My advice, don't let anyone know about this, especially Sable. Keep everything as usual. When the time is right, I'll guide you through formalizing it all." I nodded. "I understand. Thank you, Caleb. Truly. Gordon said you're the only person he trusted to use money the right way." He smiled softly, and I believe he was right. Outside the office, I stood on the stoop for a long time. Traffic wind tugged at the edge of my shawl. Sunlight slanted across the street, making everything glare bright. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. Tears still clung to my cheeks, but I didn't feel cold inside anymore. People say money can't buy happiness. Maybe that's true. But it can buy the freedom to choose how you'll be treated. On the way home, I stopped at a small corner cafe. I ordered a cappuccino, the drink Gordon always ordered for me every Sunday morning. While I waited, I opened my phone, created a new email account with a password longer than 16 characters, and set up automatic backups for the files Caleb had sent. Each step was careful, exact as if I were rebuilding a fortress around myself. When I got home, Sable was already there. She sat on the sofa on a call, her voice oddly sweet. "Yes, I can move the money by the weekend. Just make sure everything's finalized before next month, all right?" I walked lightly through the living room, keeping my face neutral. Sable glanced at me and said one last line into the phone. "Okay, we'll talk later." Then she hung up and smiled. "Oh, you're back? I was just about to ask for a small favor." That evening, I cooked a simple dinner for the family. Nathan looked worn out, while Sable talked nonstop about a real estate investment in Dallas. Her eyes lit up like someone staring at a dream. My partner and I are looking at a new project. If it goes smoothly, with just $50,000 down, the return could double in 6 months. I sliced the meat and smiled. "Sounds promising. Have you checked the legal side of the project?" She paused, then forced a laugh. "Of course! I'm not stupid." Nathan murmured something, clearly clueless about the plan. I sat quietly and listened, adding more vegetables to Ava's plate while I calculated. If Sable really moved the money, I could track it through the statements. But not tonight. Tonight, I needed silence. Night fell. The house went dark, leaving only the glow from the living room TV. I lay on the old iron bed, laptop screen lit. I saved all of Caleb's documents to a secure drive, then printed copies to store in the small safe Gordon left. I changed my bank passwords, activated two-factor authentication, and created a hidden account to route data there. Each keystroke felt like a steady heartbeat, not fear, cold clarity. Upstairs, Sable laughed loudly in the master bedroom. Her voice echoed through the floor like a hollow sound in an empty house. Nathan stayed quiet, as always. I closed the laptop and smiled to myself. She thought she was living in victory, that I was just a forgetful old woman waiting to be thrown out. She didn't know the game had begun, and the first move was already mine. I closed my leather notebook, set it by my pillow, and turned off the light. In the dark, I heard the wind moving through the magnolias outside, soft but persistent like Gordon's voice drifting back. "Cass, when you know the truth, don't be afraid. Use it like light." I shut my eyes and answered silently. "Yes, love. The light is back. And this time, it will shine straight at the ones who think they're above it all." I've always believed the best liars slip up in the smallest details, like the perfume they wear for an afternoon yoga class. That morning, Sable carried a white leather bag, wore tight leggings, but did full TV-ready makeup, dark red lips, shimmery silver eyelids, and perfume so strong it drowned out the smell of coffee in the kitchen. I didn't ask. I stood at the sink washing dishes, watching her reflection in the window. "Nathan," she said sweetly, "have lunch with your client, okay? I've got yoga downtown and might be home late." He just murmured an okay, not a hint of doubt. The garage door shut. The car engine faded. I checked the clock. 9:52 a.m. She said yoga downtown. But I knew there were beige high heels in her trunk, the kind no one wears to yoga. I dried my hands and grabbed my purse. Inside was just one thing that mattered: Gordon's old phone, which I'd set up to record video discreetly. Late morning Houston blazed with Sunday. I called a cab and told the driver to follow the pearl-white BMW ahead. The driver, an older man, glanced at me in the mirror and smiled lightly. People only follow someone when, deep down, they already know what they're going to find. "You know that, right?" I answered softly. "I do. And I'm ready." We turned down brick-paved streets and stopped at the Argonaut Hotel, an upscale spot downtown where people go to close deals or have affairs, sometimes both. I asked the driver to wait, then stepped out. Hot wind carried the damp smell of asphalt and a trace of luxury perfume from the grand lobby. I stood a few yards from the door, sunglasses on, watching. In under 5 minutes, Sable stepped out of her car, heels flashing in the Sunday fitted aqua silk dress, softly curled hair, and a smile I'd never seen at home. She walked straight inside without looking around. I followed at a safe distance. The lobby smelled of polished wood and white orchids. In the corner near the bar sat Derek Cole. I recognized him from a broker profile photo. Young, tall, slicked back hair, and the polished grin of a man selling illusions. Sable sat across from him. They touched hands across the table, and he slid a thick brown envelope toward her. I paused near a planter, pulled out the phone, and pressed and held the screen. The camera started rolling. They talked for about 15 minutes. I couldn't catch every word, but her face said enough. Whatever they agreed on had nothing to do with yoga or wellness. At the end, Derek took her hand and kissed her wrist. Sable giggled, tilting her head, letting him. I had enough. When she stood to leave, I slipped back toward the exit and blended into the crowd. On the ride home, I watched the recording. Sable's face was clear, proud eyes, a thick envelope in her hand, lips saying something that made Derek laugh. I scrubbed through and zoomed in. She touched his lapel, a wordless promise. I saved the video twice, one on the phone, one to a private cloud. By late afternoon, the sky threatened rain. Nathan got home earlier than usual, shirt damp, bringing in the smell of a new storm. Sable was already there, hair up, workout clothes on, a towel around her neck. She stood at the mirror, voice soft as mist. "You know, yoga was packed today, but I feel so much lighter. I should go more often." Nathan smiled, believing her. "I'm glad you could unwind." I walked by and set a tray on the table. Sable's eyes slid over me, cold as steel, but she kept smiling. "Cassandra, could you make me a cup of herbal tea? I need to detox." "Of course," I said. "With perfume that strong today, I think you really do need a detox." She froze for just a second, then laughed a little too brightly. "You're always so direct." I carried the tray away, oddly calm. That line, a small blade I'd thrown just to see how she'd react, and in that smile, she'd let a tremor show. That night, the house was unusually quiet. Around nearly 11 p.m., I heard Sable's heels clicking down the hall and stopping in the living room. I held my breath. She didn't realize the glow from her laptop leaked through the cracked door, the kind of light that betrays secrets. When she went upstairs, I waited 10 more minutes. Then I stepped out, silent as a shadow. The laptop was still open. No password. I sat, heart pounding, hands steady. The screen showed an inbox mid-session. The top subject line read, "Divorce paperwork nearly finished, just waiting on the estate confirmation." When I read that line, "Divorce paperwork nearly finished, just waiting on the estate confirmation," my heart didn't hurt like I expected. It just went cold. Cold like love had never lived in this house. And you, if you were in my place, what would you do after learning someone in your home was waiting to sign a verdict of betrayal? Tell me in the comments. I truly want to know whether your heart would choose silence or a fight. Below it, the sender's name, David Carrera, personal attorney. I scrolled slowly and read each line. Once the asset transfer is complete, you can proceed with the divorce without legal obstacles. As agreed, the portion in your husband's name can be moved through the shell company established in Dallas. Make sure the mother-in-law doesn't interfere. D. I felt my heart go still, like a lake before a storm. It wasn't anger anymore, it was absolute clarity. She didn't just want to humiliate me, she was plotting to steal Nathan's entire life, and if she succeeded, she would take every asset she thought belonged to his family. I took out my phone, switched to silent mode, and photographed every page of the email. Then I plugged in a small USB drive, the kind Gordon used for contracts, and copied all the data. Time crawled, suffocating. Each mouse click sounded like a heartbeat pounding through the silent room. When it finished, I pulled the USB, cleared the browsing history, and shut the laptop. I stood and listened. Upstairs, Sable laughed, the hollow laugh of someone who thinks she's hidden everything perfectly. I went back to my small room under the garage. Streetlights spilled across the wall, splitting my shadow in two. One half the humiliated woman, the other half the one who had just seized power. I opened my own laptop and created a new folder named Lotus, the name Gordon used in his love letters. Cass, you're a lotus rising from mud, but never stained. I saved all the data there, then sent a copy to the secret email account only I knew. Another copy went to Caleb Morton, no message attached, just the subject line, "Keep this for me, in case it's needed." Done. I leaned back in my chair. Rain drummed on the garage roof like a steady drumbeat. I smiled slightly. In the dark, I stared up at the ceiling and thought of Gordon, the man who told me, "Never hand your fate to someone who can't keep their word." I hadn't listened at first, but now I had. Sable Hart thought she was the hunter, but every hunter has someone hunting them. She thought she was about to slip out of the cage, not knowing she'd already stepped into the trap I was setting. I closed the laptop and turned off the light. A faint smile touched my lips, not the smile of a victor, but of someone newly awake. It rained all night in Houston, but I didn't feel cold. Because I knew, from this moment on, the power game no longer belonged to Sable. That morning, I heard the office door upstairs creak open. The soft scrape of metal on wood made me flinch. Nathan rarely went into that room. Since Gordon passed, the door had stayed shut, gathering dust like a memory no one dared to touch. I was making coffee in the kitchen when I heard him call, voice hoarse and shocked. "Mom! Mom! Come up here a second." The sound made me look up immediately. For months, Nathan had never used that tone, the voice of a son staring at something his mind couldn't yet process. I dried my hands and climbed the stairs, heart racing though my face stayed calm. The office door stood wide open. Morning light poured through the window, washing over the oak desk. Nathan stood there holding a stack of yellowed papers. I recognized them at once, Gordon's original will. The desk drawer had been pulled out. Papers were scattered. But that file lay centered on the wood, as if the owner himself had just set it down. Nathan looked at me, eyes wide, confused and wounded. "Mom, this house is yours?" I stepped closer, tracing the familiar slant of Gordon's firm handwriting. I said quietly, steady, "Yes. Your father wanted to protect me. He was afraid I'd be hurt if everything fell into the wrong hands." Nathan said nothing. He clutched the papers tighter, as if the weight of the truth had settled on his shoulders. At that moment, Sable appeared at the door. Her eyes were knife-sharp, lipstick blazing red, hair tousled like she'd just gotten up, but her voice was loud and clear. "What is that? What are you holding, Nathan?" He didn't hide it in time. He turned and stammered, It's Dad's will." Sable strode forward and snatched the document. Her eyes darted across the lines, then she suddenly screamed, "No way! You hid this? You pretended to be poor to manipulate us." I straightened, set my coffee cup down slowly, and met her gaze with a look I knew she'd never seen from me before. "Manipulate? No, Sable. I stayed silent to see what you'd do when you thought you had power." She laughed, harsh and shrill. "Oh, that's rich. You expect us to believe you were just observing, while you let me cook, clean, and take care of you like a maid?" I raised an eyebrow and said nothing. Nathan cut in, voice shaking. "Sable, that's enough." "Enough?" She snapped at him. "How naive are you, Nathan? She played the victim to make you feel guilty, and now she claims this house is hers? Can't you see she's laughing at us?" I calmly opened my purse and took out an envelope. Inside were photos of Sable at the Argonaut Hotel laughing with Derek Cole, envelope in hand. Sunlight from the window lit the desk as I laid them down beside the will. Then I added printed emails, words that couldn't be denied. "Maybe," I said evenly. "You should read these before you tell another lie." Silence filled the office. Only the clock ticked. Sable held the photos, her eyes widening, lips trembling. You followed me?" "No," I said. "I went to your yoga class. Turns out that's where people sign divorce paperwork and divide assets." Nathan was frozen. When he read the last line of the email, his face went white. He looked at his wife, voice choked. "Sable, divorce paperwork nearly finished, waiting on the estate confirmation? What does that mean?" She set the papers down and tried to steady herself. "You don't understand. It's a financial plan. It's betrayal," I cut in, my voice level, each word dropping like a stone. "Betrayal of the husband who trusted you and the mother you treated as a burden." Sable stepped back, cheeks flushed with fury. "You have no right to say that. You deceived us. You pretended to be broke to test us? What are you trying to prove?" I looked straight into her eyes, then at Nathan, head bowed, fists clenched. "I'm not trying to prove anything," I said, voice low. "I simply let you show who you really are." Nathan's hands shook. He set the papers on the desk and whispered, "I've been so stupid." "No," I said softly. "You've just been silent too long, and silence, Nathan, can be crueler than action." He lifted his head, eyes wet. "Mom, I'm sorry." I shook my head. "Don't say it. Just look at how you stayed silent and understand why they felt free to treat your mother like that." The room went quiet again. Only Sable's ragged breathing broke the air. She stepped back, then suddenly screamed, voice rough, "This old woman tricked us. You're no better than a liar." I smiled slightly, just enough to stop her short. "No, Sable. I didn't trick anyone. I was patient and let everyone reveal their own nature." I sat in Gordon's old chair, my hand on the desk, feeling the grain and every scar time had left. Here, for years, I'd sat beside my husband, planning dreams and next steps. Today, I sat alone, But I was no longer the woman shoved to the lowest floor. Nathan sank into the chair across from me, head bowed. Sable stood by the wall, breathing hard, eyes darting like a cornered animal. I opened the drawer and set a small key on the desk. The safe key. Inside are all documents for the assets, accounts, and the villa in Cancun. And this, I looked straight at Sable, is evidence of everything you've done. If I choose, one phone call sends it all to my attorney. Sable stiffened, then laughed bitterly. You think you've won? I stood and adjusted my collar. Morning light caught my face and reflected in eyes that no longer knew fear. No, Sable, I haven't won. I've simply taken back the place I never should have lost. Nathan left first wordless, steps heavy. It was just me and her. Sable leaned against the wall, hands shaking, lips pressed tight. You know, she said quietly, I used to think you were weak. Turns out you were just waiting for the right moment to twist the knife. I looked at her calmly. No, Sable, I didn't stab anyone. I simply stopped letting people step on me. She swallowed, turned, and hurried out. The door slammed, rattling the glass. I sat down and looked around the room, everything the same, except for how I felt. A chapter closed. No noise, no theatrics, just the truth, shattered open bright as sunlight through glass. That afternoon, I put Gordon's desk in order. In the drawer, his old fountain pen remained. I lifted it, wiped it clean, and placed it in its case. On the shelf, the family photo was still there, me, Gordon, Nathan, the 2 grandkids, and Sable. I took the frame down, slid out the glass, and removed the picture, then carefully cut it in half. The right side where Sable stood, I folded and placed in a separate envelope, locking it in the cabinet. I didn't hate her. Hate is a burden. I simply remembered. Because memory is the strongest evidence of justice. As afternoon light spilled across the floor in a band of gold, I knew that from this moment on, I was officially back in my rightful place as the lady of this house and of my life. And this time, I would never let anyone push me to the lowest floor again. The next noon, Houston's sky hung low and gray, heavy with storm. The house felt weighted, as if everything inside were bracing for the inevitable. I sat in the living room sorting Caleb's documents for the next steps when a door upstairs slammed hard, furious, relentless. Nathan came down pale, fists clenched. "Mom," he said, voice shaking but firm. "I can't take this anymore." I looked at him and didn't ask. He swallowed and continued. "I read everything. I saw the emails, the photos. I know you're not making this up, and I know I've stayed silent for too long." I laid a hand on his shoulder and said softly, "It's all right, Nathan. I knew this day would come." He drew a breath and shouted, "Sable, come down here!" His voice tore through the house, slicing down the stairs and slamming against the walls. I heard a door fly open and the sharp strikes of high heels on wood. Sable descended, bright red dress, heavy lipstick, face like ice. "What are you yelling about?" she snapped. "Get out of this house," Nathan said, each word thrown into the air like a brick. Sable laughed, not wounded but contemptuous. "Get out of this house? What on earth are you talking about, Nathan?" She tilted her head, mocking. "This house was never yours. Look around. Everything here is because of me. And you? You just go to work and sit. Without me, this place would look worse than that garage your mother lives in." Nathan clenched his fists, his lips trembling, but he didn't answer right away. I stood up and stepped between them. "Sable," I said softly but firmly, "you should stop." She snapped toward me, the smile gone. "You." "No again. That's enough, Cassandra. I don't need another lecture. You think a few wool papers mean you can throw me out?" I kept my eyes steady on her. "I don't need to throw anyone out, Sable. You're the one walking yourself out." The kids, Ava and Liam, were standing at the bottom of the stairs, clinging to each other. Their eyes were wide with fear, watching the adults like a storm rolling in. I turned to them, gave a gentle smile, and kept my voice light as air. It's okay, you two. Grown-ups will handle this. Ava nodded and tugged her brother back to their room, but I could see her small hands still shaking. Sable stood there, breathing hard. Then she pulled out her phone, holding it up, her voice going high. "I'll call my lawyer. I'll prove you forged those documents, Cassandra." "You'll regret this." I looked at her for a moment, then answered slowly but surely. "Maybe. But I don't live on threats, Sable. I live on the truth. And the truth can't be twisted forever." She glared at me, lips pressed tight, then turned to Nathan. "You'll regret siding with her." Nathan didn't look at her again. He just said quietly, his voice breaking, "I already regret it, for not protecting my mother sooner." That sentence silenced the whole house. For a few seconds I could hear wind hissing through the window frame, and the TV in the next room was still on, but nobody cared. Sable bit her lip, then screamed, her voice raw. "You'll both pay for this. I'm not going anywhere." "This is my house." I turned away and pulled my phone from my pocket. "Caleb," I said when he picked up, "activate the asset protection. And change every lock today. I'll have Miss Hart escorted out." I hung up and looked straight at Sable. "You have 15 minutes to pack. After that, the locks are changed." She stared at me in disbelief, then let out a bitter laugh. "You think you've won, Cassandra? You'll be alone. You've lived your whole life in your husband's shadow." I shook my head. "No, Sable. I've learned how to live without anyone's pity." She threw her purse to the floor and strode toward the stairs, each step striking a sharp, ringing note. A few minutes later, she dragged a suitcase down, the wheels banging against the steps, a dry, hard sound. Nathan watched, saying nothing. She passed him, paused for a second, then said coldly, "You'll miss me, but by then it'll be too late." No one answered. The door opened and slammed shut. Her car engine roared, then rolled off the stone drive. I stood still, looking out the window. The white BMW slipped away under the gray sky, leaving a thin line of smoke to fade. The house fell quiet after she left, a strange kind of quiet, not suffocating, not scary, just relief. I turned to Nathan. He stood against the wall, shoulders slumped, eyes red. "I'm sorry, Mom," he said softly. I walked over and put a hand on my son's shoulder. "No need to say anything. Just start over. Every wound can heal, Nathan, if you let it." He nodded, fighting tears, then sank onto the sofa, head in his hands. A stifled sob escaped small, but enough to twist my heart. I went to get Gordon's old blanket, a deep blue wool throw he used on fishing trips. I laid it over Nathan's shoulders as gently as laying down forgiveness. "Your father used to say," I whispered, "a strong man isn't one who never falls, it's the one who stands back up and isn't ashamed to cry." Nathan looked up, his eyes shining under the lamp. He nodded and murmured, "Thank you, Mom." I walked toward the stairs. The master bedroom was at the end of the upstairs hall, where I'd slept with Gordon for 40 years. I opened the door and turned on the light. The room still carried a faint scent of oak and lavender. Everything was where it had always been, the cream silk drapes, the wedding photo on the table, the armchair where Gordon read the paper. I moved slowly around the room, touching each thing, as if I were taking back pieces of my soul that had been stripped away. This room had once meant peace, then became off limits. Now I was back. I changed the lock, checked each latch, then opened the window. Outside, the rain had stopped. Pale moonlight fell over the magnolias in the yard. Leaves shivered. A cool breeze drifted in, carrying the damp scent of earth. I drew a deep breath and felt a simple freedom I hadn't tasted in a long time. That night, I lay in the old bed, listening to the steady tick of the clock. Downstairs, I could still hear Nathan's quiet sobs now and then, but they faded. Ava and Liam were fast asleep. I closed my eyes and let my mind drift. In my thoughts, I saw Gordon sitting at the edge of the bed, wearing his kind smile like always. "You did well, Cass," he said in my memory. "You stood up at the right time." A tear fell, but it was a tear of peace. For the first time in months, the Reed house was truly quiet. No high heels, no snide remarks, no contemptuous stares. Just the stillness of someone returning to herself. I whispered to the dark, "Welcome back, Cassandra. This is your home." And that night, I slept soundly, truly soundly, as if the whole house were breathing with me. A week later, Houston was sunny again. Harsh light pierced the living room window, making the dust motes glitter like a golden shower. I was rereading the investment reports Caleb had sent when the doorbell rang, a long, decisive ding, as if whoever was outside wanted to assert their right to be there. I didn't rush to get up. From my seat, I peeked through the curtain. Sable. And beside her, a man in a gray suit, slicked hair, pointed chin, Derek Cole. I smiled slightly. Some people never tire. I opened the door without a word. Sable gave a stiff smile, her lips shaking. Derek bowed his head, voice smooth. "Mrs. Reed, we're here to talk civilly." I quietly stepped aside to let them in. In my mind, every piece was already placed like a chess game, where I knew exactly who would make the final losing move. Sable sat on the sofa but didn't lean back. Her posture was taut. Derek sat next to her and set his briefcase on the table. I looked at them for a moment, then said, "You seem busy. Get to the point." Sable took a breath, trying for a soft tone. "Cassandra, we're all adults. I don't want this to be a battlefield. I just think, if you truly care about Ava and Liam, you should consider a settlement." I raised an eyebrow. "A settlement?" Derek opened the briefcase and took out an envelope. "You have substantial assets," he said, calm, like he was negotiating a property deal. "We're only asking for a small amount, $3 million. Call it support to stabilize things for the kids." I laughed short and sharp, like a blade cutting the air. $3 million? To stabilize? Sable jumped in, voice higher, shaky but trying to stay composed. "You have more than enough. Gordon left $19 million, not counting stocks and real estate. We're asking for a small portion for Ava and Liam. You can't take everything. You're not young anymore." I leaned back, fingers interlaced. "And if I say no?" Derek gave a polite smile. "Then we'll have to go the legal route. I know people at the county courthouse. At your age, a few light evaluations and they could rule you incompetent. Control of the assets would shift to a guardian, maybe your son, or someone else." I didn't move. I let each of his words fall like ice. Sable added, eyes flashing meanly, "Can you picture Ava and Liam testifying? Kids are honest, Cassandra. Once they say you forgot their names or mixed up meal times, the court will believe it." I stayed still. Then I rose slowly and walked to the wooden cabinet by the window. I opened the third drawer and took out a black folder. "You," I said quietly. I thought I'd let things pass peacefully. Turns out, some people don't understand where to stop. I set the folder on the table so gently it barely made a sound. On the cover, Cole, Derek, personal debt record. Derek frowned at it. "What is this?" I opened it, revealing statements, bank logs, and betting slips. "I know you owe $200,000 to a Dallas casino, and I know you forged a partner's signature in a small Austin real estate deal. I have full copies." His face shifted from calm to panic. He swallowed and tried to steady his voice. "Are you threatening me?" "No," I said, silk smooth. "I'm telling you that if I file, you lose your license. And when that happens, don't expect anyone to hire a broker tied to fraud and gambling." Sable turned to Derek, her face going pale. "Derek, say something." But he only stammered. She can't possibly know." I cut in. "I know more than you think. And not just about you." I turned to Sable, my gaze so calm it made her step back. "As for you, Sable, if I send this video to the court, You won't just lose your reputation, you'll lose custody. I opened my laptop. The screen lit up with the footage from the Argonaut. Sable laughing, touching Derek's lapel, then signing a document. She exhaled hard, almost choking. No, you can't. I can. And I will if you stay here one more minute. The living room fell silent. The wall clock ticked, tick, tick like a countdown to their last moment in this house. Derek collapsed into the chair, hand over his face. Sable shook, trying to stay upright, tears starting to fall. You're being cruel, she said, voice breaking. I just wanted to take care of my kids. I looked at her for a long time. Take care of them? You left Ava to sleep alone for 2 nights because you were busy at a hotel with him. I have camera footage. You chose what mattered. Most. Sable. And it wasn't your children. She sank onto the sofa, hands over her face, sobbing. Derek looked up, voice ragged. What do you want from us? I answered simply, nothing. Just for you to leave. I walked to the door and unlocked it. Noon light poured in, brightening the whole room. Get out of my house, I said slowly, clearly. Right now. Derek stood first, shoulders shaking, head bowed, not daring to look at me. Sable stayed seated, tears running. She looked around as if seeing for the first time that this house had never been hers. Cassandra, she choked. You'll regret throwing out the mother of your grandchildren. I looked at her not with hatred, but with a calm, tired resolve. I'm just choosing to protect what I should have protected long ago. She lowered her head. Derek took her hand and helped her up. They walked slowly to the door. At the threshold, Sable looked back one last time, tears streaming, but I said nothing more. The door closed with a dry click. That sound echoed through the house like a period at the end of a long nightmare. I stood still in the living room. Sunlight slid across the floor, drawing long streaks on the rug. I felt my shoulders grow lighter, as if a burden years old had just dropped away. I poured myself a cup of chamomile tea and took it out to the porch. The air was still, with only the wind and the rustle of magnolia leaves. Somewhere, children's laughter drifted from afar, Ava and Liam playing in the backyard. I closed my eyes and let the warmth of the sun sink into my skin. When I opened them, I smiled. Not the smile of victory, but of release. I knew the final battle was over, and this time, I didn't just keep my house, I kept myself. 3 days after the last confrontation, I got a call from Caleb Morton. His voice was low but firm, the tone of someone used to facing storms. Cassandra, everything's ready, he said. I just filed for protective orders and a restraining order with the county court. Sable Hart and Derek Cole won't be able to come near you or any member of your family for 2 years. If they violate it, the police will handle it immediately. I sat on the porch, looking out at the freshly trimmed magnolia garden. The morning light was soft, white blossoms trembled in the breeze. The peace felt strange, like the world had finally stopped spinning so I could breathe. Thank you, Caleb, I said. I don't want to see them ever again. Caleb chuckled quietly. And you won't have to. The law can be slow, but when it moves, it's powerful. That afternoon, Nathan went to the law office to sign the official divorce papers. When he came back, he sat at the dining table, eyes tired but brighter than usual. It's done, Mom, he said hoarsely. I submitted all the evidence, the emails, the video, the recorded threats. The attorney says this will move fast. Sable has nowhere left to turn. I nodded and didn't ask anything more. He was quiet for a moment, then said softly, You know, the hardest part isn't the divorce. It's facing the truth that I let you endure it alone all that time. I looked at my son, a 38-year-old man, hair beginning to gray, shoulders weighted with guilt and remorse. I laid my hand on his and smiled. You faced it, Nathan. That's the first step to healing. Don't keep punishing yourself. Everyone has to learn to say, I'm sorry, and then live it, He bowed his head, gripping my hand without another word. The next week, the Houston Press began to report on it. Headline in the Houston Chronicle on Tuesday morning: real estate broker Derek Cole investigated for financial fraud and extortion. The article was long, with a photo of him leaving the courthouse, head down. Another paper ran a subhead: source reveals whistleblower is widow of the late businessman Gordon Reed. I folded the paper, neither pleased nor upset. I wasn't seeking attention. I just wanted justice to be seen, even if only in a few columns of print. Caleb called that afternoon, sounding more at ease. The investigation is widening. The Dallas casino confirmed Derek Cole owes exactly $200,000 and once impersonated a partner. Police are reviewing potential fraud charges. I answered simply, good. There's no joy in watching someone fall, but there is a quiet relief when the truth is put back where it belongs. In the days that followed, the Reed house settled into its old rhythm for the first time in years. Every sound felt gentle. Ava and Liam still went to school as usual, but I noticed something different in their eyes. They no longer looked at me with hesitation. There was warmth and trust instead. One afternoon, Ava asked, "Grandma, why do you and Dad talk so much?" I smiled and said, "Because sometimes grown-ups have to relearn how to talk like kids honestly, without hiding." She nodded, then whispered, "I like it when you tell the truth." "Mom, well, my old mom used to say things that weren't true." I hugged her, my heart softening. I knew their inner scars would remain, but I also knew I could help them tell the difference between real love and exploitation, a lesson that took me nearly a lifetime to learn. A few weeks later, Caleb and I sat in his office to finalize the last paperwork. On the table was a new file, cream-colored cover labeled Reed Foundation, Scholarship and Educational Trust. Caleb slid it toward me. "Everything's in order. You can start the scholarship program for Ava, Liam, and other children if you'd like." I picked up Gordon's fountain pen and signed beneath the word Founder. As the ink soaked into the paper, I felt something both complete and aching inside me. I said quietly, "He would be proud, wouldn't he?" Caleb smiled. "I believe so. Gordon used to say, Cass doesn't just preserve assets, she plants value." I left the office feeling light as air. I knew I'd done the right thing, not just to set things right, but to create something new out of old ashes. Nathan began therapy on his doctor's advice. At first he resisted, but slowly I saw him change. He spoke more slowly, listened more. One evening he stood outside my door and knocked softly. "Mom, I just wanted to say, thank you for not giving up on me." I opened the door and smiled at him. I had no reason to. "Just remember, forgiving isn't forgetting. It's stopping the past from running your life." He nodded, then smiled, gentle as when he was a boy. I also decided to hire a new housekeeper, Estelle, a Dominican woman in her 50s, kind and discreet. When she asked, "Do you want me to clean the downstairs too?" I answered, "No, leave it as is. I want that room empty." It's a reminder that I was pushed down, and I walked back up. Estelle just nodded and didn't ask more. The house began to bloom again. Every morning, the smell of baked goods drifted through the kitchen, blending with the sound of Ava and Liam laughing. I no longer felt like the maid in my own home. I was the true mistress of the house, but more than that, a woman who had reclaimed her dignity. That night, I sat alone in Gordon's study. On the desk was the old wooden box he left me. I opened the lid and took out a yellowed letter. The handwriting slanted but steady. "You'll be free if you wait until you're truly clear-headed. Don't strike back in anger, Cass. Only when you see everything clearly will you truly win." I sat quietly, reading the lines over and over. Outside, a light wind carried a few magnolia leaves drifting across the porch. I said softly, as if Gordon were still right there, "I waited, Gordon." And I did it. Then I smiled the smile of someone who survived, woke up, and finally became free. 3 months after things settled down, I packed my bags. No fuss, no send-off. I simply told Nathan, "Son, I need a few months to set things straight, both in my head and in my heart." He understood, nodded, and hugged me for a long time. "Go, Mom. Call me when you feel at peace." The flight to Cancun took nearly 3 hours, but to me it felt like a lifetime. From the plane window, the ocean unfurled endlessly, so blue I had to blink to believe it wasn't a dream. Gordon used to say, "If there's a place on Earth where time stops for me, it's Azure Cove." Now I was returning there, Azure Cove Villa, the home he bought for our 40th anniversary. The taxi stopped along a road winding by the shore. The sea ahead looked like a sheet of blue silk stretched across the sky, waves brushing the fine sand. The villa tucked among tall palms, white walls, red tile roof, windows thrown open toward the ocean. When I stepped inside, the scent of salt mixed with familiar old wood, a fragrance that flooded me with memories. I threw open the main windows. Sea wind rushed in, billowing the white curtains. Light flooded the room, illuminating each piece Gordon had chosen: a hand-painted canvas by a local artist, an oak rocking chair, our wedding photo smiling in the sunday. I stood there a long time, then whispered, "I'm home, Gordon." On my first afternoon in Cancun, I walked the beach. The sand was powder soft, the water a stretch of turquoise without end. Ripples lapped at my ankles, cool and clear. I slipped off my sandals and let the sea rinse away the dust of hard years. People say the ocean can wash away wounds. I don't know if that's true, but in that moment, I did feel lighter. The next day, I hired a local couple, Lucia and Matteo, to care for the villa. Lucia was petite, long black hair, eyes gentle like someone who's understood too much. Matteo was quiet, few words, meticulous hands. As I showed them around, Lucia smiled, her Spanish laced with English. "This house has a present. Soul, Señora. It feels like it's been waiting for someone to return." I smiled. Maybe that someone is me. From that day, the villa wasn't empty anymore. Each morning, Lucia opened the windows to let the sun pour in, and Matteo trimmed the garden. Wind, waves, and the smell of morning coffee blended into a soft hymn of life. I settled into a new rhythm. At 6 a.m., I walked the shoreline, carrying Gordon's old straw hat. The waves beat steady. Each footprint I left was erased, a reminder that the past can't be held, only the present is real. I often sat on a rock by the water and watched the sun lift from the horizon, blazing and calm. In the vast sound of the sea, I could almost hear someone whisper in my ear, "You're okay now, Cass." Finally okay. At noon, I went to the local hospital, where volunteers help American tourists with health issues. They needed an English speaker, and I signed up at once. It wasn't heavy work, but it made me feel useful again. I helped an elderly woman from Minnesota find the right medication, comforted a young man with a broken leg from a diving accident, and sometimes just chatted with lost visitors in the halls. A young nurse told me, "Señora Reed, you bring a sense of peace. Everyone who talks to you seems lighter." I smiled, maybe because I've weathered a lot. Those who've known storms learn to speak softly. In the evenings, I sat on the porch and watched the sunset fall over the sea. The sky shifted from gold to pink to violet, then slipped into night. Lights from the boats offshore flickered like drifting stars. That's when Nathan usually called on video. Every Sunday, his face showed on the screen, tired but at ease. Behind him, Ava and Liam jostled to tell their stories. "Grandma, I got an A in history." "Grandma, I got the lead in the school play." I listened, smiling until my eyes blurred. Nathan looked at me and said quietly, "You seem happier than ever, Mom." Answered, "Maybe because I'm not afraid anymore. You know, only when fear is gone do we really live." Sometimes I sent money from the Reed Foundation to help pay tuition for children in town. Lucia helped me choose families in need. I didn't want to be the rich recluse by the sea, but someone who gives in the right way. Each time I signed a transfer, I remembered Gordon's words. Money is just a tool, Cass. The real value is how you use it. Nathan changed a lot, too. He went to therapy regularly and learned how to share with his kids. On our calls, he no longer avoided my eyes. I heard a tenderness in his voice I'd never heard before. Ava and Liam grew and grew wiser. They told me that every night, Nathan read them Gordon's letters as a way to show them how their grandpa had loved this family. In the 3rd month, I hosted a small dinner. Lucia made Yucatan-style grilled fish, and Mateo picked an old bottle of red wine Gordon had left. I put on soft music and opened the windows to let the breeze in. The sound of the waves blended with the wine's aroma and our laughter. I raised my glass and said quietly, "Thank you for being here, for helping this house come back to life." Lucia pressed a hand to her chest and smiled. "No, Senora, you're the one who warmed this place up." That night after they left, I walked the house alone. High ceilings, white walls, moonlight pouring through the windows onto the wood floor. The whole space was still, with only the steady sound of the waves like breathing. I stepped onto the balcony and looked at the sea. The night sky stretched wide, and far-off boat lights looked like falling stars on the water. I leaned on the railing, inhaled the salty air, and felt something I can't quite name, peace mixed with gratitude. Before going to bed, I didn't lock the door. Not because I was careless, but because I didn't need to defend myself anymore. No more threats, no more fear under this roof. I lay down on the wide bed, soft blanket pulled up, the window cracked to let the sea breeze in. Outside, the waves lapped gently, a steady rhythm like Gordon's heart beating somewhere in the dark. I closed my eyes and whispered on a breath, I'm still a mother, a grandmother, and a free woman. Finally, and for the first time in years, I slept soundly without locking the door, as if the whole world had forgiven me and I had forgiven myself. Mornings at Azure Cove always start with the sound of the waves. They're never loud, just steady, like the heartbeat of a place that's learned to forgive. I usually make a cup of tea, take it out to the porch, and watch the sun slowly climb over the edge of the sea. The first light is pale gold, shining on the wedding photo of Gordon and me on the small wooden table. One morning like that, Ava sat beside me. She'd grown taller, hair tied neatly behind her back. She stayed quiet for a long time, then asked in a hush, as if afraid to break the waves, "Grandma, are you still mad at Mom?" I set my tea down and looked out at the water, where sunlight danced on the surface. "No," I said, "I'm not mad, but I haven't forgotten." Ava tilted her head. "What does not forgetting mean?" I smiled. "It means remembering so we don't get lost again, sweetheart. Some wounds don't need ointment, they just need us to stop touching them." She nodded, then rested her head on my shoulder. The wind carried the smell of salt and the sound of children laughing somewhere in it. A few weeks later, Nathan brought the kids to visit me. He looked healthier, his eyes calmer than before. At lunch, I took out a thick envelope and set it on the table. "Nathan, these are the papers transferring the Houston house," I said. "That home is yours now, along with a fund to maintain it until Ava and Liam are grown." He looked up, stunned. "Mom, no, that's your house. You should keep it." I shook my head, voice light as the breeze. "No, son. Your father wanted you to learn to stand on your own. You've done that now, and this is the rest of the lesson. I don't need that house to feel safe anymore." He was quiet for a long time, then stood and hugged me tight. I heard him whisper, barely above a breath, "I promise I won't let you and Dad down again." That afternoon, Ava and Liam sat in the kitchen with me. I taught Ava how to keep a journal, a habit I've had since I was her age. "You don't have to write well," I said. "Just be honest. Some things can't be spoken, but when you write them down, they get lighter." Ava smiled and wrote her first line. "Today, Grandma taught me to write about feelings instead of being scared of them." Liam, who loves standing by the stove, was eager to learn to cook. He asked me, "Grandma, why is cooking so important?" I said, "Because it's the simplest way to show love. People who cook learn to wait, to care, to listen." He nodded hard, then burned the first pancake. I laughed and he blushed. By late afternoon, we all cleaned up together. Ava taught me how to use TikTok, how to scroll, how to like, how to read comments. "Grandma, don't tap the ads by mistake." I pretended to be serious. "So I'm modern now, huh?" Both kids burst out laughing. "Grandma, you're more trending than our mom," Liam said, and I laughed until tears came. But there were quiet afternoons too, the kind that tug at your heart. When the kids had gone back to Houston, I stayed alone in the white villa. The waves still broke, the wind still blew, but something in me had grown lighter, as if the last threads of resentment had loosened on their own, leaving a calm space behind. That evening, I checked my phone. A text came from an unknown number, just a few lines. "Cassandra, I'm sorry for everything." The sender's name, Sable. I stared at the screen for a long moment. My finger paused. Over reply, then I quietly deleted the message. Not out of anger, but because I no longer cared. Some apologies arrive too late to matter, because the person listening no longer needs to hear them. Late that night, I sat in Gordon's study. The wood desk still held a small scratch where he used to sign his first contracts. In the drawer were a few blank sheets and his favorite black fountain pen. I took it out, uncapped it, and began to write. "Gordon, I kept what you left me, my dignity. It took me years to learn that winning isn't revenge. It's standing up without losing your kindness. Nathan has learned how to love again, and Ava and Liam are growing in the light, without fear. As for me, I'm not angry at anyone anymore, not even myself. Azure Cove is a place of peace now, not a place of painful memories. Thank you for believing I was strong enough to walk this whole road." I folded the letter and placed it in the nightstand drawer, right beside our wedding photo. In the picture, I'm smiling, and Gordon is looking at me with that gentle gaze, the look of a man who knows the woman beside him will never bow to injustice. That night, I opened the window. Waves pulsed offshore, the moon laying silver light across the water. I sat on the bed, my hand resting on the drawer where the letter lay. Inside me there was no more emptiness, no more sighing. Only the stillness of someone who crossed a storm without losing her heart. Lucia was right, this house has a soul, but I think I'm the one who was brought back to life here. Off the coast, waves kept breaking, echoing against the rocks and fading, like thousands of tiny needles stitching the tears in my heart closed. The needles of time, forgiveness, and love. I closed my eyes and whispered, "Gordon, I've mended my life." And for the first time, sleep came as softly as a breath, peaceful, warm, and whole, like a wound finally healed. The next morning, Cancun's sky was clear as crystal. Early sunlight poured through the window and lit our wedding photo. I touched the cool glass and looked at his smile, the one that stayed with me for 42 years, and then some. I stepped onto the porch. The sea stretched blue, the wind carried salt, and the scent of jasmine Lucia had just placed in a small vase. Everything at Azure Cove Villa was the same, but I wasn't. I was no longer the woman trembling after being pushed to the lowest floor of her own home. I was the woman who stood up quiet and steady and took back the right to live with dignity. At noon, Nathan called on video. Ava and Liam squeezed into the frame, laughing as they showed off. "Grandma, we grew tomatoes. They're almost as tall as me." I laughed and said, "Good. Everything beautiful starts with planting." Nathan looked at me, smile warm. "I think you planted the most precious thing, self-respect and love." I said, "No, your dad planted it. I just tended the soil." In the afternoon, I walked the beach, leaving footprints and watching the waves erase them. Life is like that, old wounds fade and lessons remain. I stopped by the big rock where I liked to watch the sunset and murmured, "Gordon, do you see? I did it." The sun sank, a pale gold spilling across the water. From a distance, Lucia called, "Signora Cassandra, dinner is almost ready." I turned back, smiling, feeling as if I'd just closed a long book, not with a period, but with a quiet breath. Night fell, and I wrote the last lines in my journal. I lost what I thought I could never get back: trust, respect, family. But in losing, I found myself. Some victories don't roar. They're just a regular woman learning to laugh again after the storm. I closed the journal and set it on the table. Outside, the waves kept answering beat after beat, like Gordon's reply, like the breath of a new life. I turned off the light, cracked the window to let the sea air in. Moonlight washed the room in soft silver. I closed my eyes, knowing that tomorrow morning I'll step onto the porch, pour a cup of tea, and smile at the sunrise like a promise to myself that I'll live, love, and keep telling my story with peace. If you're hearing this from anywhere in the world, tell me, where are you listening from? My life may be different, but our feelings are the same. We've all been hurt, and we all long to be loved the right way. Leave a comment and tell me how you've healed a hurt with kindness. And if you believe, like I do, that kindness is still the strongest power we have, please like, subscribe, and stay for the next stories. Thank you truly for listening all the way to the end. Because if someone out there hears this journey, then I know every wound is worth healing.